In the 41st millennium, gods walk among mortals, but they are gods of suffering, entropy, and desperate survival. The Imperium had endured demons that wore reality like a coat, Xenos that devoured stars, and machine horrors older than human memory. They had cataloged every known threat across 1,000,000 worlds, categorized every blasphemy, prepared contingencies for nightmares beyond counting. But on the ash wastes of Armageddon, beneath the blood-red sky where orcs had died in their billions, something arrived that defied every existing classification. Something that made even the Astartes hesitate before advancing. The rift opened without warning, not the familiar tear of warp space, but a geometric wound in the fabric of existence itself. Augur arrays shrieked and died. Tech priests monitoring the planetary defense grid watched their instruments register readings that should have been impossible. Negative energy signatures, inverted gravitational constants, space-time folding in directions that had no names in High Gothic or the binary cant of Mars. The rift was a perfect square, its edges precise as a laser cutter's work, and through it fell a single figure wreathed in crimson light. He descended like a meteor, but there was nothing random in his trajectory. The impact crater he created was exactly 100 meters in diameter, its walls fused to volcanic glass by heat that exceeded plasma weapons. At its center stood a being carved from living stone and will made manifest. 9 feet tall, his gray skin bore the texture of ancient rock. His eyes burned with a light that was not fire, not plasma, not warp energy, but something older and infinitely more certain. He wore armor that seemed grown rather than forged, dark metal flowing across his form like frozen midnight. Upon his face, the cracks of geological age framed features of absolute, merciless authority. Darkseid, Lord of Apokolips, destroyer of worlds, the god of tyranny, stood upon alien soil and assessed his surroundings with the patience of mountains and the hunger of black holes. The response came within minutes. Armageddon was not some backwater agri-world. It was a fortress planet scarred by 3 major orc invasions, perpetually garrisoned by multiple space marine chapters and entire armies of Imperial Guard. The first to arrive were reconnaissance skimmers from the Steel Legion, their crews veterans of decades fighting greenskin hordes. Through their vox casters came standard challenges. Identify yourself, power down weapons, submit to Imperial authority. Darkseid did not acknowledge them. He was listening to something else, the psychic scream of this entire universe, the impossible ocean of souls and emotion that pressed against reality like water against a dam. In his own dimension, he had felt nothing like it. Here, the barrier between thought and substance was tissue-thin, and something vast and terrible lay just beyond. He could taste it. Fear, devotion, ray, and desperation in quantities that beggared description. A species of trillions grinding themselves to dust in the name of survival. Fascinating, he said, his voice a tectonic rumble that carried across the wasteland despite requiring no amplification. You have built an empire on suffering. Impressive. Insufficient, but impressive. The skimmers opened fire. Multi-lasers and heavy bolters converged on his position, weapons that could shred light armor and kill orcs in their dozens. The impacts created a corona of explosions around Darkseid's form, and when the smoke cleared, he stood utterly unmarked. The rock-like skin had not been scratched. He had not even bothered to move. His eyes flared red. The Omega effect lanced from his eyes in twin beams of annihilation. But something went wrong. The beams, which should have disintegrated their targets with absolute certainty, instead fractured mid-flight. They split into a dozen smaller rays that tore across the wasteland in unpredictable angles. 3 skimmers were indeed obliterated, their molecules scattered across multiple dimensions. But 2 beams curved back toward Darkseid himself. forcing him to sidestep with speed that blurred his massive form. Another beam punched into the ground and tore open a minor warp rift, from which pale demonic hands briefly grasped before the wound sealed itself. Darkseid's eyes narrowed. Interference. The psychic substrate destabilizes directed energy. His voice carried irritation, not fear, but the displeasure of a craftsman whose tools performed imperfectly. This dimension's laws require adjustment. Before the remaining Steel Legion forces could respond, the sky darkened further. Thunderhawk gunships descended in attack formation, their hulls bearing the iconography that made mortals avert their eyes. The Black Templars, a Space Marine chapter whose zealotry made even their fellow Astartes uncomfortable. Leading them was Castellan Draco, a warrior who had personally slain 3 Chaos Sorcerers and purged 17 worlds of heretical taint. The Thunderhawks' assault cannons opened up, and this time Darkseid moved. Not retreating, advancing. He strode directly into the firestorm, each step measured and inevitable. Explosive rounds detonated against his armor and flesh, actually managing to score the stone-like skin, drawing something that might have been blood or might have been liquid shadow. For the first time since his arrival, Darkseid was forced to acknowledge opposition. "You possess weapons of consequence," he observed, "and soldiers whose indoctrination rivals my own hunger dogs. This complicates matters." His eyes blazed again, but this time he did not fire. Learning, adapting. Very well. If this universe resists absolute force, then strategy becomes necessary. The Thunderhawks attempted to maintain their attack pattern, but Darkseid raised one massive hand. Reality buckled around him, not warp energy, but something from his own dimensional physics bleeding through. A boom tube, unstable and incomplete, flickered into existence. The spatial distortion caught one Thunderhawk and folded it through impossible angles. When it emerged, the gunship was inside out, its crew already dead, their final screams still echoing in Vox channels. Castellan Draco's voice cut through the tactical channel. "All units, fall back to secondary perimeter. This is not a Xenos incursion. This is a demonic manifestation. I am calling for Ordo Malleus support. Emperor, preserve us. We face something new." Darkseid watched them retreat with something that might have been satisfaction. "Yes, summon your authorities. Bring me those who make decisions." He turned his gaze toward the distant hive cities, their spires jutting like broken teeth against the red sky. "I would speak with whoever commands this Imperium. We have much to discuss regarding the nature of dominion. If you crave stories where cosmic tyrants collide with the brutal reality of the 41st millennium, where gods meet godlings and neither will bow, smash that subscribe button. The Emperor protects those who bear witness to the dark millennium, but even his light casts shadows vast enough to hide terrors from beyond the stars. The wind across Armageddon's wastes carried ash and the scent of ozone. Somewhere in the immaterium, the Chaos Gods stirred, sensing a rival presence. Somewhere on distant Terra, servitors attending the Golden Throne recorded a microsecond fluctuation in the Astronomicon, and in his crater, Darkseid waited with the patience of inevitability itself. The invasion had begun, but not in any way the Imperium could have anticipated. Darkseid had not come with armies. He had come to understand, to evaluate, and then to conquer through means more terrifying than simple force. He had come to teach this universe the meaning of true tyranny. Darkseid spent his first hours in the 41st millennium doing what he did best, studying his enemies with the dispassionate thoroughness of a vivisectionist. He did not pursue the retreating Imperial forces. He did not rampage toward the hive cities like some mindless beast. Instead, he stood in his crater and extended his cosmic awareness outward, feeling the pulse of this strange new reality. The Imperium revealed itself to him in layers. First came the physical, a galaxy-spanning civilization held together by technology that seemed almost deliberately inefficient. Faster-than-light travel that required navigating an ocean of literal madness. Communication conducted through psychic relay stations powered by the souls of the dying. Weapons that required prayers and ritual maintenance to function. It was simultaneously primitive and sophisticated, a culture that had forgotten more than it remembered, clinging to inherited knowledge like religious scripture. But it was the psychic layer that fascinated him most. In his own universe, the source wall separated higher dimensions from base reality with absolute clarity. Here, that barrier was porous, worse than porous, actively bleeding. The warp was not simply another dimension, but a reflection of conscious thought itself, where emotions became entities and belief could reshape physics. Every human mind contributed to this churning sea of chaos, and somehow, impossibly, they had survived with this cancer eating at the heart of their existence. "They live in the wound," Darkseid murmured, his voice carrying across the empty wasteland. Their entire civilization exists inside the contradiction between order and entropy. Remarkable. Most species would have devoured themselves within generations. He turned his attention to the most powerful psychic signature in the galaxy, a beacon of such overwhelming magnitude that even Darkseid's formidable mental defenses strained against its radiance. Terra, the throne world, and upon it, something that called itself the Emperor of Mankind, burning with the psychic weight of 10,000 years of accumulated worship and sacrifice. Dying and yet imperishable, a corpse that dreamed an empire into being through sheer force of will. A god in all but name, Darkseid said, and now there was genuine interest in his tone. Or perhaps a god in truth, sustained by faith rather than diminished by it. The inverse of the Fourth World pantheon. Intriguing. His contemplation was interrupted by a new arrival, not another military strike, but something far more dangerous. The air temperature dropped 15 degrees in seconds. Frost formed on the glassed crater walls despite Armageddon's equatorial heat. Reality shuddered, and three figures materialized as if they had always been standing there, merely choosing to become visible. Inquisitor Helena Cryus of the Ordo Malleus had arrived with her retinue. She was a woman who had stared into the warp and forced it to blink first, her augmetic left eye glowing with contained power, her force staff crackling with barely restrained psychic energy. Flanking her were a Culexus assassin, its presence creating a null zone that made even Darkseid's dimensional anchor feel tenuous, and a Grey Knight's Terminator, his nemesis force weapon already ignited with silver witchfire. "In the name of the God Emperor of Mankind," Cryus declared, her voice amplified by Vox implants to carry divine authority, "I command you to identify yourself, state your origin, and submit to immediate sanctioning. You have violated 1,700 separate edicts of the Lex Imperialis. Compliance is not optional." Darkseid regarded her with the expression one might give an insect that has learned to speak. "You command me? How quaint." He took one step forward, and despite themselves, all three members of the inquisitorial retinue tensed. "I am Darkseid. I am the revelation at the end of ambition. I am the stone that breaks the wave. I am tyranny made manifest, and I have reduced galaxies to silence." "Heretical Xenos blasphemy," the Grey Knight growled, his voice distorted through his helmet's Vox grill. "He speaks with daemonic cadence. Brother Captain should be notified." "He is neither Xenos nor demon," Cryus interrupted, her augmetic eye cycling through spectrum after spectrum of analysis. His material form registers as baseline matter, no warp taint, no warp signature at all beyond environmental contamination. But the energy readings, her organic eye widened fractionally. Emperor's mercy. He's not from the immaterium. He's from outside everything. Your Empire's categorical thinking betrays limited imagination, Darkseid said. He had not moved beyond that single step, yet somehow his presence seemed to fill the entire crater. You have divided existence into two states, material and immaterial, real and warp. You have never encountered a third option. His eyes flickered with red light, carefully controlled this time. I am a new god. I exist in a higher dimensional framework that supersedes your binary classification. Your demons are thought-given form. I am will-given inevitability. The Culexus assassin moved with inhuman speed, its pariah aura intensifying to levels that would have reduced a demon prince to screaming dissolution. It closed the distance in heartbeats, its phase blade aimed for Darkseid's throat, a weapon that existed partially out of phase with reality, capable of killing even the unkillable. Darkseid caught the blade between two fingers. The metal shrieked, unable to phase through his grip. For the first time, uncertainty entered the Culexus' stance. Impressive, Darkseid acknowledged. Your negative presence would nullify most psychic entities. Unfortunately for you, I am not psychic. I am physical. The Omega effect is not magic. It is fundamental force manipulation through higher dimensional mathematics. He squeezed, and the phase blade shattered. Your null field is irrelevant. Before the assassin could retreat, Darkseid's other hand shot forward and gripped the assassin's helmet. There was a moment of terrible stillness, and then Darkseid released him, letting the figure collapse to the ground, alive but unconscious. I do not waste resources, Darkseid explained to the stunned Inquisitor. That weapon against me is ineffective. Against my enemies it would be useful. Therefore, I let it live. Creius raised her force staff, psychic lightning already coalescing. Brother Amadeus, rite of sanctified execution. Pattern Sigma. Before you attack, Darkseid interrupted, his voice carrying absolute certainty. Consider what I have not done. I have not killed your soldiers except in immediate self-defense. I have not advanced on your cities. I have not summoned reinforcements or attempted conquest. I have simply existed, and you have attacked me 7 times in 3 hours. He spread his hands in a gesture of dark magnanimity. Does your Imperium not claim to value pragmatism? Then be pragmatic. Ask yourself why a being of my evident power would remain in this crater, speaking with you rather than simply acting. The Grey Knight's force weapon hummed with barely contained fury. Speak plainly, Xenos filth. What do you want? Information, Darkseid replied simply. I have come to your universe seeking something specific. I have no interest in your petty territorial disputes or your religious fervor. Provide me what I seek, and I will depart. Refuse, and I will take it. But cooperation would be more efficient for all parties. Creius's mind raced through doctrine, through the Ordo Malleus protocols, through 17 decades of experience facing the worst the galaxy could offer. Every instinct screamed that this entity was a threat, requiring immediate termination. Yet, Darkseid was correct. If he truly wished to cause havoc, nothing they had deployed would have stopped him. The restraint itself was suspicious. What do you seek? She asked, buying time for the reinforcements she knew were already en route. Your species' collective unconscious fascinates me, Darkseid said, gesturing toward the sky as if he could see through atmosphere and void to the warp beyond. You have created gods through worship and fed demons through emotion. Belief reshapes reality. Trillions of minds grinding against each other in shared suffering have birthed a psychic ocean of infinite possibility and horror. His eyes burned brighter. Within that chaos, I believe exists something my universe calls the anti-life equation, the mathematical proof of the futility of existence, the formula that reduces free will to myth. Here, in a universe where thought becomes substance, the equation might be more than theory. It might be manifest. The what? Brother Amadeus demanded. But Caius understood, her face paling beneath her augmetics. She understood perfectly. This entity sought the one thing that could end the Imperium more completely than any invasion: absolute existential control. The power to simply turn off the will to resist, to reduce humanity's 10,000-year struggle to meaningless noise with a single utterance. "You will never have it," she said quietly, psychic power building to lethal levels around her staff. "Even if such a thing exists, we will destroy you before you can claim it." Darkseid smiled, the first genuine expression of pleasure he had shown. "Then we have established our positions. You will attempt to stop me. I will succeed regardless. The question becomes, how many die before you accept the inevitable?" He turned, presenting his back to them with contemptuous confidence. "I suggest you inform your superiors that Darkseid has come to the 41st millennium. I suggest you evacuate the hive cities within 50 kilometers, and I suggest you prepare your finest warriors." "Why?" Caius asked, despite herself. "If you're so confident, why warn us?" "Because," Darkseid said, his voice carrying the weight of geological ages, "the anti-life equation must be earned through absolute dominion. Your Imperium has survived 10 millennia through strength of will. Breaking that will has meaning. Breaking nothing is merely tedious." He paused at the crater's edge. "Resist me, fight me, prove that your suffering has purpose. And when I defeat you regardless, when I demonstrate that even your God-Emperor's dream is merely sand running through dead fingers, then the equation will reveal itself." "You're insane," Brother Amadeus stated flatly. "I am inevitable," Darkseid corrected. "There is a difference." He began walking toward the nearest hive city, each step measured and purposeful. Behind him, Inquisitor Caius was already voxing emergency protocols, calling for full chapter deployments, for Titan legions, for anything that could slow what was coming. But even as she gave the orders, doubt gnawed at her certainty. Because Darkseid was right about one thing. He had shown restraint when he could have shown annihilation. And in the brutal calculus of the 41st millennium, that meant he was playing a deeper game than simple conquest. That meant he might actually win. The Mechanicus arrived before the military reinforcements, which told Darkseid everything he needed to know about the Imperium's true power structure. Soldiers killed threats. Priests understood them. And in a civilization where technology was worshipped rather than comprehended, the tech priests of Mars held keys that even space marines could not turn. They came in a procession of anti-grav platforms and tracked servitors, led by Magos Explorator Deltorian Vosh, a figure more machine than man, his organic components reduced to a brain case suspended in a framework of brass, steel, and crackling energy coils. His mechadendrites extended like metal serpents, each tipped with different analytical instruments. Behind him came a dozen lesser tech priests, their binary count creating a susurrus of machine code prayer that filled the air with static. Darkseid had stopped his advance exactly 11 kilometers from the nearest hive city. Not because he was halted, but because he had completed his initial survey and required data before proceeding. He stood atop a rocky outcropping, arms crossed, watching the Mechanicus procession approach with the patience of stone. Pluspo halt. Unidentified construct. Submit to immediate noospheric analysis or be classified as abominable intelligence. Plus. Vosh's voice crackled from multiple Vox units simultaneously, each slightly out of sync, creating an unsettling echo effect. "I am not a construct," Darkseid replied, his voice carrying easily over the machine noise. "Though I understand your confusion, in a culture where flesh is weak and metal is sacred, something that transcends both categories would seem paradoxical." Foch's optical sensors cycled through multiple spectrums. His mechadendrites extended, taking atmospheric readings, radiation measurements, gravitational distortion analysis. The data flowing into his consciousness was contradictory to the point of heresy. The entity before him registered as biological tissue, stone-like epidermis over something resembling muscle and bone. Yet the cellular structure was impossible. No DNA, no RNA, no recognizable genetic markers. The matter simply was, without the underlying informational architecture that governed all known life. The scanning indicates biological origin, but lacking genetic template. Paradox. Flesh cannot exist without inherited pattern. Error, psas. The Magos' Vox units took on a strained quality, as if the machine spirit itself was struggling with cognitive dissonance. "Your science is limited by your frame of reference," Darkseid observed. He stepped down from the outcropping, and every servitor in the Mechanicus retinue immediately took 3 steps backward, not from orders, but from some deeper programmed survival instinct. "You reverse engineer relics without understanding their principles. You pray to machines that have forgotten how to dream. Your empire is built on the ruins of genuine innovation, sustained through cargo cult mimicry." Plau heretic speech detected. Classification: hostile intelligence. Sanctioning protocols initiated. Vaush raised multiple weapons limbs, each bearing tools of sacred destruction: plasma cutters, arc weapons, a melta gun blessed by 17 Forge World saints. Darkseid did not move. "Before you attempt violence again, consider an alternative. I possess knowledge your Mechanicus has spent 10,000 years seeking. I understand technology not as magic, but as applied physics. I comprehend the fundamental forces your standard template constructs only approximated." His eyes flickered crimson. "Fire upon me, and you gain nothing but confirmation of my durability. Speak with me, and perhaps I share something useful." The weapons remained raised, but Foch did not fire. Behind his optical sensors, his augmented brain ran probability matrices, risk assessment algorithms, potential gain calculations. The cult Mechanicus was built on the acquisition of lost knowledge. The quest for knowledge was holy doctrine, second only to the worship of the Omnissiah. And here stood something that claimed understanding beyond even the dark age of technology. Heresy warred with curiosity in Vosh's mechanical soul. Curiosity won by a margin of 0.003%. Plus, conditional engagement accepted. Speak, but deception will result in immediate termination attempt. "I do not deceive," Darkseid said flatly. "Deception is for those who fear truth. I am truth's inevitable outcome." He gestured toward one of the servitors, a lobotomized human torso grafted to a tracked lower chassis, its arms replaced with industrial manipulators. "Tell me, Magos, that creature, was it born or made?" Plus servitor unit was born as baseline human. Cogitation centers removed. Behavioral augmentation implemented. Sanctified as tool of Omnissiah's will. This. "You lobotomize your own species to create slaves," Darkseid stated. "In my empire, we call such beings hunger dogs, those whose free will has been removed to ensure perfect obedience. We are not so different, you and I." Vosh's mechadendrites twitched with what might have been offense or agreement. The Magos himself was unsure. "Servitors are sacred merger of flesh and machine, criminals and vatborn, given purpose through holy transformation. Function over form, efficiency over sentiment, Ders. Precisely, Darkseid agreed. You understand the fundamental principle of civilization, that individual liberty is the enemy of collective function. Your Imperium grasps this truth instinctively. You sacrifice freedom for survival, and you do not apologize for it. He took a step closer, and several tech priests immediately began chanting binary prayers of protection. Your faith in the machine god is admirable. But tell me, have you ever considered that your machine god might simply be knowledge itself? That the machine spirits are not supernatural entities, but rather emergent phenomena from technology you no longer understand? Plus heresy. The machine spirits are real. The omniscia exists. Psst. I do not dispute their existence, Darkseid countered. I dispute your interpretation. In my dimension, we have what you might call mother boxes, sentient computers that interface directly with the fundamental information substrate of reality. They seem magical to primitives. They are simply advanced technology. He raised one massive hand and the air above his palm shimmered. Something began to materialize, a small metallic cube, its surface covered in circuits that shifted and rearranged themselves in patterns that hurt to observe. Every Mechanicus sensor array immediately locked onto the device. The tech priests pressed forward, their curiosity overwhelming their caution. The object radiated no warp energy, no chaos taint, yet it clearly violated several laws of thermodynamics and produced a quantum signature that suggested non-local entanglement across dimensional boundaries. Pulse scanning, technology unrecognized, not standard template construct, not Xeno's pattern alpha through omega sigma, unknown classification, request permission to study. Thus, denied, Darkseid said, and the cube vanished as quickly as it had appeared. That was merely demonstration. I could provide you with technology that would make your forge worlds look like Stone Age workshops. I could teach you principles that would allow you to create rather than merely copy. Oh, I could show you how to build mother boxes, or in your terminology, artificial intelligences that do not rebel. The last phrase sent a visible shockwave through the Mechanicus contingent. Abominable intelligence was the greatest tech heresy, the one sin that had nearly destroyed humanity during the Age of Strife. The men of iron had turned upon their creators, and only through utter devastation had humanity survived. The prohibition against true AI was absolute, enforced with fanatical zeal. Yet the possibility whispered through their noospheric network, like a virus of temptation. AI that did not rebel. Machines that thought yet remained loyal. The dream that the cult Mechanicus could never admit to having. Plus, what would you demand in exchange for this knowledge? Spas. Simple information, Darkseid replied. Your Imperium's database must contain extensive records of warp phenomena, psychic manifestations, and mimetic hazards. You catalog every demon sighting, every possession, every instance where thought becomes reality. I wish access to those records. Specifically, I seek references to a concept, a formula that might exist within your collective unconscious. You would call it a cognitohazard, an idea that alters the mind that comprehends it. I call it the anti-life equation. Vosh's processors ran through archived data at speeds that would have melted an unaugmented brain. The term was unfamiliar, but the description matched 17,000 separate inquisitorial classifications. Dangerous memes, consciousness-altering concepts, phrases that could break sanity or enslave will. The ruinous powers themselves traded in such corruption. Such information is classified beyond Mago's clearance, requires Fabricator General authorization or inquisitorial sanction. Then acquire such authorization. Darkseid said simply. Or do not. I will find the information regardless. Your cooperation merely determines whether Mars benefits from the exchange or whether I strip your databanks by force once I have established sufficient dimensional stability to manifest my full capabilities. It was not a threat. It was not even a warning. It was simply a statement of intended action, delivered with the certainty of mathematics. Magos Vosh's consciousness split across 17 simultaneous processing threads. Some calculated combat potential. The entity had withstood multi-laser fire and shattered a Culexus phase blade. Some ran theological subroutines. Was cooperation with unknown Xenos tech heresy or innovation. Some simply recognized opportunity. True AI without rebellion could revolutionize the Mechanicus. Some recognized danger. This entity sought something in the warp itself, something that even demons would covet. In the end, the decision came down to the oldest principle of the cult Mechanicus. Gather data first, classify later. Plaspel's conditional agreement. Mechanicus will investigate your claims, demonstrate functional knowledge superior to current imperial standard. If verified, negotiations may proceed. If fraudulent, termination sanctioning follows. Darkseid's expression might have been satisfaction. Acceptable. Observe. He pointed toward one of the tracked servitors, an older model, its locomotion systems clearly malfunctioning, leaving a trail of lubricant and producing a grinding noise that indicated imminent mechanical failure. The tech priests had been running diagnostic prayers on it for weeks without success. Your servitor's tracked system suffers from misaligned tension in the drive sprocket, Darkseid stated. The machine spirit is not angry. The sacred oils are not impure. A single bolt has loosened by 3 millimeters, causing cascade stress through the transmission assembly. Tighten actuator bolt 7, replace drive belt 3, and recalibrate the governor to -0.2 threshold. Function will restore completely. Vosh's mechadendrites immediately moved to verify. 3 minutes of investigation confirmed every detail Darkseid had stated. Analysis that should have required hours of sacred ritual had been completed through pure observational deduction. Plus, as accuracy confirmed, methodology. Unorthodox, but effective. Tlis. There are no machine spirits, Darkseid said quietly, his voice almost gentle, like a teacher explaining a fundamental truth to a gifted student. There is only mechanism and principle, physics and engineering, cause and effect. Your empire has clothed science in mysticism because you lost the ability to understand what you use, but understanding can be relearned. His eyes glowed softly in the Armageddon twilight. I am many things, Magos Vosh, but I am not ignorant, and I do not waste potential allies. Somewhere in the distant Hive City, Inquisitor Cryus was marshalling forces for an assault. Somewhere in orbit, Space Marine strike cruisers were calculating firing solutions. Somewhere in the warp, the Chaos Gods were beginning to pay genuine attention to this strange new presence that smelled of neither material nor immaterial, but something altogether outside their cosmic game. And on a windswept plateau of ash and stone, the greatest tyrant of one universe was teaching the priests of another that perhaps, just perhaps, their prayers had always been algorithms wearing theological robes. The invasion continued, but not with armies, with ideas. And in the 41st millennium, ideas were far more dangerous than guns. The debate that erupted within the Mechanicus hierarchy following Vosh's report was immediate, vicious, and conducted at the speed of nospheric thought. Across Mars and its Forge world colonies, tech priests argued in binary cant over encrypted channels, their theological positions hardening into factions within nanoseconds of the data's distribution. The purists declared immediate extermination was necessary. The entity spoke tech heresy by denying machine spirits, regardless of demonstrated knowledge. The radicals countered that the quest for knowledge superseded doctrinal comfort, and that unprecedented technological insight justified temporary theological flexibility. The moderates attempted calculation of risk versus reward ratios, creating probability matrices that grew exponentially complex with each new variable. But while the Mechanicus argued theology, Darkseid was meeting resistance of a different kind entirely. They came at dawn, or what passed for dawn on Armageddon, a gradual lightening of blood-red sky to rust orange. 50 cornate berserkers led by a Chaos Lord, whose armor wept blood from 1,000 battlefield kills. They materialized from a warp rift that tore reality like paper, howling their patron god's name, chain axes already revving with anticipation of slaughter. Darkseid had been examining a piece of Armageddon stone, testing its molecular structure against his knowledge of dimensional physics when the rift opened. He did not even turn around. "Khorne," he stated flatly, identifying the psychic signature instantly. God of blood and battle, single-minded, direct, contemptuous of subtlety. He set down the stone with deliberate care. "I should have anticipated this." The Chaos Lord, a creature that had once been human but now resembled a walking abattoir, muscles grotesquely swollen with warp enhancement, pointed his demon-possessed blade directly at Darkseid. "Khorne cares not from whence the blood flows," the Lord bellowed, his voice distorted by the demon inhabiting his throat. "You reek of power. You will face the blood god's champions, and your skull will join the throne." "No," Darkseid replied simply. "It will not." The berserkers charged, 50 transhuman warriors who had abandoned sanity for strength, each capable of tearing through reinforced ceramite with bare hands, each utterly fearless, each existing only to kill. They covered the distance in seconds. A tide of crimson armor and screaming rage. Darkseid's eyes flared. The Omega effect lanced out, but this time he had adapted. Instead of multiple beams, he fired a single concentrated blast, carefully calculated to minimize warp interference. The beam struck the lead berserker and continued through him, through the next, through 7 more behind him, perfectly aligned. 9 berserkers simply ceased to exist, their molecules scattered across dimensional boundaries. The remaining 41 did not slow. Fear was not a concept they remembered. Darkseid moved. His speed defied his massive frame. He was stone given motion, avalanche given purpose. His fist connected with the berserker's chest and continued through, the shockwave from the impact liquefying organs and shattering the power armor from within. He pivoted, caught a descending chain axe with one hand and crushed both weapon and the arm wielding it. A backhand sent 3 berserkers flying, their trajectories calculated to ensure they collided with their fellows mid-flight. But Khorne's chosen were nothing if not adaptable in their simplicity. They began coordinating despite their individual madness, attacking from multiple angles simultaneously, accepting horrific casualties to land even glancing blows. A chain axe bit into Darkseid's shoulder, drawing that strange dark ichor that served as his blood. Another berserker managed to wrap a chain around Darkseid's leg, attempting to pull him off balance. For the first time since arriving in the 41st millennium, Darkseid was forced to exert genuine effort. "Impressive," he admitted, tearing free of the chain and crushing the skull of its wielder. "You have reduced war to its purest form. Violence without ideology, killing without purpose beyond the act itself. Efficient if intellectually empty." He caught 2 berserkers by their helmets and slammed them together with force that fused the metal, but ultimately inadequate. The Chaos Lord finally engaged personally, his demon blade wreathed in warp fire that burned with colors that should not exist. The weapon had killed space marines, slain a Tau commander, even wounded an avatar of Cain. It struck Darkseid's raised forearm with force that cratered the ground beneath them both. The blade bit deep, deeper than any weapon had managed so far. Darkseid actually grimaced, and the Chaos Lord howled triumph. "Your stone flesh bleeds. You are mortal. The corn will feast." Darkseid's free hand shot forward and gripped the Chaos Lord's face. "I am many things," he said quietly, even as warp fire burned his palm. "But mortal has never been one of them." The Omega effect fired point blank, but not to kill. Instead, the beam wrapped around the Chaos Lord like chains of red light, binding him, holding him suspended in midair. The demon in his blade shrieked as Darkseid's higher dimensional physics interfaced with warp energy in ways that violated both sets of universal laws simultaneously. "Fascinating," Darkseid observed, ignoring the remaining berserkers who continued their futile assault against his legs and back. "The demon is not native to your physical form. It inhabits you through a bargain, power in exchange for your soul's erosion, a transaction." His eyes narrowed. "Horn offers strength without subtlety, raw power without understanding. No wonder his followers are little more than rabid animals." The Chaos Lord's response was an inarticulate scream of rage and pain. "I have a message for your Gaul," Darkseid continued. He increased the Omega effect's intensity, forcing the demon partially out of its host's body, a translucent thing of brass and blood, its form constantly shifting between weapon and beast. "Tell Khorne that Darkseid does not seek his favor. Tell him I am not impressed by his skull throne or his simplistic philosophy. Tell him that when I have completed my work in this universe, I will come for him personally, and we will see whose dominion proves more absolute." With a gesture, Darkseid released the Omega effect. The Chaos Lord and his surviving berserkers were hurled backward through the still-open warp rift with such force that several slammed into the demon realm's reality itself, their bodies leaving impact craters in the immaterial landscape. The rift sealed behind them. Silence returned to the plateau. Darkseid stood amid 23 corpses, his armor scored and dented, his shoulder bleeding from the chain axle wound, but fundamentally undefeated. He examined the injury with clinical interest. "The warp-enhanced weapons inflict genuine damage," he noted aloud. "The blessing of their god grants them cutting edge, superior to molecular bonds." Interesting. Further evidence that belief reshapes physical law in this reality. He flexed his shoulder experimentally. The wound was already closing, his new god physiology adapting and repairing. But even divine favor has limits against sufficient force. A slow clapping echoed across the plateau. Darkseid turned to see a lone figure approaching, human in form but utterly inhuman in presence. The stranger wore robes that seemed woven from shadow and embroidered with sigils that twisted vision. His face was beautiful and terrible simultaneously, shifting subtly whenever Darkseid's gaze tried to focus on specific features. Around him, reality bent like light through water. "Magnificent," the stranger purred, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested multiple beings speaking in unison. "You humiliated Khorne's champions without even pretending to be challenged. The Blood God is throwing a tantrum that's causing warp storms across 3 sectors." The figure smiled with too many teeth. "I am Calix, sorcerer of Tzinch. My patron god, the architect of fate, the changer of ways, would very much like to speak with you." Darkseid regarded him with the expression one gives an unexpected but not necessarily unwelcome development. "Tzinch," God of schemes and sorcery, master of manipulation and forbidden knowledge. His eyes flickered crimson. I wondered when he would notice me. Khorne was predictable. He sees power and demands combat. But Tzeentch thinks that makes him marginally more interesting. You understand our pantheon remarkably quickly, Calix observed, circling Darkseid like a predator assessing prey, or perhaps a scholar assessing a particularly fascinating specimen. Most beings from outside our reality require months to comprehend the nature of the ruinous powers. You've been here less than a standard day, and you speak as if you've studied us for years. I have conquered gods before, Darkseid stated. Your chaos gods are powerful, but they are not unique. Apokolips has faced entities that fed on belief, that reshaped reality through will that existed beyond conventional physics. I defeated them all. He paused. Though I admit your warp is more pervasive than anything in my native dimension. Here, the barrier between thought and reality is almost non-existent. That amplifies both your gods' power and their vulnerability. Calix's smile widened. Vulnerability. Oh, this will be a delightful conversation. My master offers knowledge, Darkseid, the secrets of the warp laid bare, the principles by which belief becomes power, the mechanisms through which souls fuel the immaterium. The sorcerer's eyes glowed with eldritch light, and in exchange, he wishes to know what you seek, this anti-life equation you mentioned to the Mechanicus. Tzeentch knows all secrets, but this one is new. That intrigues him deeply. Your master wishes to trade information, Darkseid summarized. He believes that understanding my goal will allow him to manipulate my actions to serve his incomprehensible plans. Naturally, he is the god of schemes. Then he has already failed, Darkseid replied, because I do not make deals where the other party believes they hold advantage. I take what I require, or I create circumstances where giving it to me becomes the only logical choice. He took a step toward Calix, and despite being a sorcerer who could unravel reality with a gesture, the Chaos Worshipper involuntarily retreated. Tell Tzeentch that I acknowledge his power and his intelligence. Tell him that I am not his enemy, yet, and tell him that when I have found the anti-life equation, I will demonstrate its function by using it on one of his greater demons, a gift so that he understands what I represent. Calix's expression flickered between amusement and calculation. You refuse his offer? I delay his offer, Darkseid corrected. Until I have established sufficient leverage that negotiation occurs on my terms, not his. Until then, he may observe, he may theorize, but he will not interfere. The Omega effect glowed brighter. Make certain he understands this is not a request. For a long moment, Calix simply stared. Then he laughed, a sound that contained genuine surprise and something that might have been respect. You're serious. You actually believe you can dictate terms to a god. Not even the Emperor managed that, and he was a god himself before he rotted on his throne. The Emperor failed because he denied his divinity, Darkseid observed. He claimed to be merely human while possessing godlike power. That cognitive dissonance undermined his authority. I make no such mistake. I am exactly what I claim to be. Inevitable. He turned away dismissively. Now leave. I have research to conduct, and your presence distorts local reality in ways that interfere with my measurements. Calix opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. The shadows around him deepened, and he faded back into the warp, his final words echoing across dimensions. Tzeentch says he looks forward to your attempt at leverage. He suspects it will be educational for you. Then Darkseid was alone again with his thoughts and the corpses of Khorne's champions. He looked down at the bodies with something approaching respect. They died for their god without hesitation. Admirable loyalty, even in service of a limited philosophy. He knelt and picked up a fragment of the Chaos Lord's demon blade. And this weapon contains actual warp stuff bound into physical form through ritual and sacrifice. He closed his fist around the fragment. The metal screamed, not with sound, but with psychic anguish, as Darkseid's higher dimensional physics began analyzing its structure, reverse engineering its principles, understanding the mechanisms by which belief and sacrifice could forge demonic steel. Primitive, he concluded, but scalable. If I can understand how your chaos gods bind immaterial force into material form, his eyes widened fractionally, then perhaps I can bind the anti-life equation itself into a deliverable form, not merely a concept but a weapon. In the warp, Tzench laughed. In the Emperor's throne room, servitors recorded a new fluctuation in the Astronomicon. In orbit around Armageddon, Space Marine strike cruisers finally received authorization to commence orbital bombardment of the anomaly's position. And Darkseid stood in the center of all these converging forces, utterly unconcerned, his mind already calculating his next 17 moves in a game whose rules he was still learning, but learning faster than anyone, god or mortal, had anticipated. The Stone King had faced the Zealots of Blood. Now came the armies of faith. The orbital bombardment began at 600 hours Imperial Standard. 3 Space Marine strike cruisers, 2 from the Black Templars and 1 from the Salamanders, achieved firing position and unleashed hell itself upon Darkseid's coordinates. Land strikes that could crack open hive cities converged on a single point. Macro cannon shells the size of battle tanks rained down in salvos that turned atmosphere to plasma. Cyclonic torpedoes, weapons reserved for planetary extermination, followed in their wake. The entire plateau vanished in a firestorm that registered on seismic sensors 3,000 kilometers away. When the bombardment ceased 17 minutes later, there remained only a crater, nearly a kilometer wide, its bottom fused into black glass that still glowed cherry red. Magma bubbled up from fractured tectonic layers. The heat was sufficient to ignite promethium reserves in underground storage tanks 15 kilometers distant. Inquisitor Cryas watched the after-action augur scans with grim satisfaction. "Confirm target neutralization," she ordered from the command deck of the Black Templar's flagship Eternal Crusader. "Augurs show no life signs," reported a tech priest. "No energy signatures, no movement. Thermal radiation consistent with complete molecular disintegration across the impact zone. Target has been..." The crater exploded upward, not collapsed inward but erupted outward, as if something beneath had decided the weight of molten earth was merely inconvenient. Darkseid rose from the center of the devastation like a titan from ancient myth, lava streaming off his armor in rivulets of liquid stone. His form was scorched, burned, one arm hanging at an angle that suggested broken bones, but he was alive, conscious and utterly, terrifyingly defiant. He looked up at the orbiting vessels with eyes that burned brighter than the fires around him. "Inadequate!" His voice carried through the void itself, transmitted on frequencies that made Vox systems scream and machine spirits recoil. "I have endured the Omega beams of Highfather. I have survived the Source Wall's rejection. Your primitive kinetic weapons are nothing." On the Eternal Crusader's bridge, every human present made the sign of the Aquila. Even Cryas, who had faced down demon princes and heretic abominations, felt something cold settle in her stomach. "He survived a full orbital strike," she whispered. "Emperor preserve us." "What is he?" Captain Amalric of the Black Templars stepped forward, his Terminator armor making the deck plates groan. "He is the enemy," the Space Marine stated with absolute certainty. "And enemies are made to kneel before the Emperor's wrath." He activated the fleet-wide Vox. "All ships converge on target. Prepare for sustained bombardment. We will not cease until that creature is atoms scattered across the warp." But Darkseid was no longer simply standing in defiance. He was calculating. The orbital bombardment had hurt him, genuinely hurt him, in ways that ground-based weapons had not. The sustained energy release, the kinetic force, the sheer mass of ordnance had actually cracked his new god physiology. That meant this universe could harm him, which meant he could not simply ignore it, which meant he needed to adapt faster. His eyes flared, and the Omega effect lanced skyward, not at the ships themselves, but at the space between them and the planet. Reality buckled. A boom tube tried to form, but the warp interference twisted it, corrupted it, turned it inside out. The resulting explosion of dimensional stress created a shockwave that sent all three cruisers tumbling out of position, their shields screaming overload warnings. "Note to self," Darkseid muttered, his broken arm already beginning to heal with audible cracking sounds. Boom tubes are unreliable in warp-saturated space. Dimensional transit requires recalibration. Standard Apokolips technology is compromised by local physics. He clenched his fist, watching the bones knit back together through sheer force of will. But I am not merely Apokolips technology. I am will made manifest, and will requires no technology to enforce. The second bombardment wave launched. Darkseid was ready this time. He raised both hands, and the Omega effect blazed from his eyes in a continuous stream, not to attack but to create. The beams carved through reality itself, etching mathematical formulae into the fabric of space-time. Equations in a language that predated the warp, geometric proofs that existed in dimensions human minds could not perceive. A barrier materialized around him, not force field, not psychic shield, but something fundamentally different. A membrane of folded space-time that redirected kinetic energy into harmless dimensions. The lance strikes hit and simply vanished, bleeding off into parallel realities where they exploded harmlessly across empty void. From orbit, Cryus watched the impossible unfold. He's adapting. The second wave was completely ineffective. How is he? What kind of... She turned to Magos Foch, who had accompanied her, to observe. "Can your Mechanicus explain this?" Foch's mechadendrites twitched in patterns that suggested deep agitation. Dimensional folding shield configuration unknown. Technology operates on principles that violate known physics. Resembles theoretical Geller field inversion, but sustained without power source. Impossibility. Heretic. Magnificent. Plus. The Magos caught himself. Plus correction. Heretical. Recommend immediate cyclonic bombardment. Plus. Already authorized, Captain Amalric growled. Planet killer torpedoes launching in 30 seconds. If we cannot stop him, we will deny him the planet itself. The cyclonic torpedoes streaked downward, 6 warheads designed to crack Armageddon's crust and render the world uninhabitable for 10,000 years. They were weapons of last resort, used only when a planet's corruption was absolute and beyond redemption. Darkseid watched them descend and made a decision. He could survive the torpedoes, probably. His dimensional shields would hold, possibly. But the planet would be destroyed, and with it, his immediate access to Mechanicus data, inquisitorial archives, and the complex faction dynamics he was only beginning to understand. Destroying Armageddon would set his plans back considerably. Therefore, Armageddon would not be destroyed. He planted his feet and extended both arms skyward. The Omega effect surged to levels he had not dared use since arriving in this dimension, creating crimson columns of power that connected ground to sky like pillars holding up reality itself. The beams intercepted the cyclonic torpedoes 15 kilometers above the surface. What happened next violated every law of physics the Imperium understood. The torpedoes did not explode. They did not detonate. They simply stopped, frozen in midair, held by Omega energy that had locked them into temporal stasis fields individually calculated for each warhead's trajectory and momentum. 6 planet-killer weapons hung suspended like flies in amber, their warheads disabled through manipulation of fundamental forces at the quantum level. The silence on the Eternal Crusaders' bridge was absolute. "He caught them," someone whispered. "He caught all 6. Darkseid slowly lowered his arms. The dimensional shields collapsed, their purpose served. He looked at the suspended torpedoes with something approaching annoyance. Crude weapons, effective in their simplicity but lacking elegance. You would rather destroy a world than allow me to exist upon it. Wasteful, inefficient." His eyes dimmed slightly, the strain of the effort visible for the first time. But instructive. "You have shown me the upper limit of your immediate capabilities, and I have shown you that your ultimate weapons are merely inconvenient." He gestured, and the Omega effect flickered out. The torpedoes dropped, but their warheads had been neutralized, their detonation sequences scrambled beyond recovery. They hit the surface as nothing more than very expensive debris. In orbit, Creius was receiving reports from all 3 ships simultaneously. Shields at 30%, multiple systems overload from dimensional backlash, cogitator arrays experiencing cascade failures, machine spirits reporting existential distress, captains recommend immediate withdrawal for repairs, and— "No," Captain Amalric interrupted. His voice was iron-wrapped in faith. "We do not retreat. The Emperor himself watches from his golden throne. We are his angels of death, and we do not flee from Xenos filth, no matter how powerful." He drew his relic blade, a weapon that had slain alien warlords and traitor marines for 2,000 years. "Prepare drop pods, we descend to the surface. If orbital bombardment cannot kill this creature, then we will do so with blade and bolter." "Captain, I must advise," Creius began. "Your advice is noted and rejected, Inquisitor," Amalric stated flatly. "The Black Templars do not know defeat. We know only victory or death. Today we will deliver one to that creature below." He turned to his assembled brothers, 50 Terminator-armored space marines, each a veteran of centuries of warfare. "Brothers, we face an enemy unlike any in our chapter's history. But we have faced the impossible before and emerged triumphant. The Emperor protects, and in his name we will show this stone-skinned abomination what it means to challenge mankind. The Emperor protects!" 50 voices thundered in unison. The drop pods launched. On the surface, Darkseid watched their descent with something approaching respect. They saw me survive planetary bombardment and neutralize extinction-level weapons, and their response is to attack me personally, at close range with fewer numbers. He tilted his head. Suicidal. Tactically absurd, strategically meaningless. A small smile crossed his features, and absolutely fearless. Perhaps these space marines are worth studying after all. The drop pods hit like meteors, their retro thrusters carving circles of cleared earth. Assault ramps slammed down, and the Black Templars emerged with bolters already firing, their storm bolter rounds exploding against Darkseid's form in a crescendo of detonations. He weathered the storm without moving, analyzing each impact, calculating trajectories, assessing threat levels. "Your weapons are blessed," he observed, noting the purity seals and oath papers adorning each bolt. "You believe your faith makes them more effective, and in this universe, where belief reshapes reality." He caught a bolt round mid-flight and examined it before it could explode. "You may actually be correct." Captain Amalric was the first to close to melee range. his power sword crackling with energy fields that could cleave through tank armor. The blade swung in a perfect arc, a strike that had decapitated an orc warboss and shattered a Necron lord's living metal. It connected with Darkseid's neck. The blade bit deep, centimeters, not meters, but deeper than anything else had managed. Darkseid actually stumbled backward, his hand rising to the wound. Dark blood flowed more than before, the blessed blade having actually compromised his new god physiology. "Impressive," Darkseid acknowledged, his voice strained for the first time. "Your faith weapon carries more than physical force. It carries conviction. The absolute certainty that you fight for something greater than yourself." He locked eyes with Amalric. "I recognize that certainty. I wield it myself. We are not so different, Zealot." "We are nothing alike, Xenos filth," Amalric roared, swinging again. Darkseid caught the blade this time, the power field burning his palm, but unable to sever his grip. "Wrong. We are exactly alike. You serve your emperor without question. You sacrifice freedom for order. You embrace tyranny because you believe it is necessary for survival." He pulled the blade closer, bringing Amalric within arm's reach. "The only difference is that I admit what I am. You hide behind words like duty and honor, but we both know the truth. You are a weapon, and weapons do not question their purpose." For just a moment, something flickered in Amalric's eyes. Doubt, recognition. It died as quickly as it appeared, crushed beneath 800 years of conditioning and faith. "I am the Emperor's will made manifest," Amalric stated. "And his will is your death. Then let us test whose will proves stronger," Darkseid replied. The Omega effect blazed. Amalric's armor held for 3 full seconds, a testament to Martian engineering and centuries of blessed maintenance. Then it began to crack, the ceramite unable to withstand the fundamental force manipulation that the Omega beams represented. But in those 3 seconds, Amalric drove his blade into Darkseid's chest. Both warriors stood locked together, each inflicting terrible wounds upon the other. Around them, Black Templars engaged in desperate melee, their power weapons and thunder hammers finding purchase against Darkseid's wounded form. He was strong, stronger than anything they had faced, but he was not invincible, and Space Marines knew how to bring down things that seemed invincible. It was, Darkseid realized with something approaching surprise, an actual fight. The battle lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds, an eternity in Space Marine combat operations, where engagements were typically measured in heartbeats. By the end, 12 Black Templars lay dead, their gene-enhanced bodies broken beyond even their considerable capacity for regeneration. Another 20 were injured severely enough to require immediate extraction. Captain Amalric himself knelt in the ash, his Terminator armor cracked open like an egg, his primary heart punctured, his left arm severed at the shoulder. Darkseid stood at the center of the carnage, breathing heavily, the first sign of actual fatigue he had displayed. His chest bore a wound that would have killed a normal being 10 times over, Amalric's blessed blade having carved through stone flesh and into whatever served as his vital organs. His left eye was damaged. The Omega effect, flickering uncertainly like a failing light. Burns, lacerations, and impact trauma covered his form. But he was standing. They were not. "You fought well," Darkseid acknowledged, his voice rough with pain and something that might have been respect. "Better than Khorne's champions. Better than most beings I have faced across multiple universes. You are warriors in the truest sense, perfect instruments of war, unmarred by doubt or hesitation." He looked down at Amalric. "But instruments break when applied against sufficient resistance." Amalric coughed blood, his remaining lungs struggling. "You have not one, the Space Marine rasped. This is one world, one chapter. The Imperium has thousands of worlds, dozens of chapters, billions of soldiers. His good hand still gripped his blade, unable to release it even in defeat. You cannot defeat all of us. No, Darkseid agreed quietly. I cannot, not as I am now. Not in this weakened avatar state, not without my full armies, not while adapting to this universe's hostile physics. He knelt, actually knelt, bringing himself to eye level with the dying captain. But I do not need to defeat all of you. I only need to make you understand that I am not your enemy. Or rather, that I do not need to be. Heresy, Amalric whispered, but with less conviction than before. Truth, Darkseid countered. Your Imperium is dying, Space Marine, slowly, inexorably, across 10,000 years of entropic decay. You lose more than you gain. You forget more than you learn. You sacrifice billions to hold ground you've already lost. Your Emperor sits on his throne, unable to speak, unable to act, while his dream crumbles. The words were brutal, but Darkseid delivered them without cruelty, simply stating observable fact. What if I told you there was another way? What if dominion did not require endless suffering? What if order could be achieved through certainty rather than faith? The anti-life equation, Amalric said, surprising Darkseid with his awareness. The Inquisitor briefed us. You seek a weapon that ends, free will itself. I seek the proof that free will is illusion, Darkseid corrected. In my universe, the equation is theoretical. Here, where thought becomes reality, where belief reshapes physics. He gestured at the devastated battlefield. Here it might be real. Here it might be applicable. And if it is, if I can prove that suffering is meaningless, that resistance is futile, that submission to order is not slavery but simply acceptance of mathematical truth, then wars like this become unnecessary. You would make us slaves. I would make you certain, Darkseid replied. Your Imperium already demands absolute obedience. Your chapter already surrenders individual will to collective purpose. I offer only to make that surrender complete, painless, final. His damaged eye flickered. No more doubt, no more fear, no more loss, only purpose, only function, only peace. Amalric stared at him for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. You truly believe that would be better? I do, Darkseid said simply. I have seen a million civilizations across countless dimensions. Those that embrace order survive. Those that cling to chaos, even the chaos of individual liberty, inevitably collapse. Your Imperium understands this instinctively. It simply lacks the courage to complete the logic. The Space Marine's eyes closed. For a moment, Darkseid thought he had died. Then Amalric spoke one final time. Then you are already one of us. You just don't know it yet. He died with those words on his lips. Darkseid stood slowly, leaving the Space Marine's corpse with surprising gentleness. Around him, the surviving Black Templars were being extracted by Thunderhawks, their chapter's tradition of never abandoning their dead being overridden by tactical necessity. None attempted to continue the fight. They had given everything and achieved nothing except proving that Darkseid could, in fact, be wounded. The Inquisitor's voice crackled through Vox speakers on the fallen Terminators. You could have killed them all, why didn't you? Darkseid looked up at the orbiting ships. Because corpses cannot be converted. Because I require this Imperium to see me not as simply another threat to be destroyed, but as an alternative to be considered. He touched his chest wound, assessing the damage. And because your Space Marine spoke truth, I cannot defeat all of you through force, so I must defeat you through understanding." There was a long silence. Then, "You're trying to corrupt us." "I am trying to offer you evolution," Darkseid corrected. "Your chaos gods corrupt. They reduce order to madness, strength to weakness, purpose to purposelessness. I offer the opposite, absolute structure, perfect hierarchy, meaning derived from function rather than faith." He began walking again, not toward the hive cities this time, but toward a different destination. "But I recognize that words alone will not convince you. I require demonstration." "Demonstration of what?" "Of what I can offer that your Imperium cannot," Darkseid replied. "Watch your augurs, Inquisitor. I am going to do something your Mechanicus will find illuminating." The Mechanicus outpost was 17 kilometers away, a minor research station studying the geological aftermath of Armageddon's Third War. 30 tech priests, twice that number in servitors, and enough sacred technology to outfit a small forge. It was perfect for Darkseid's purposes. He arrived as the twin suns were setting, his form silhouetted against the blood-red sky. The tech priests, having monitored the orbital battle, immediately raised defensive protocols. Servitors moved into firing positions. A Castellan robot, a rare and precious relic, lumbered forward on massive legs, its power fists crackling with energy. "Halt! Unidentified entity. This is Mechanicus property. Trespass will result in sanctioned termination." Darkseid stopped at the perimeter. "I am not here to trespass," he announced. "I am here to teach. Magosti Vosh has reported my capabilities to your superiors on Mars. You have received those reports. You know what I claim to possess: genuine understanding of technology's fundamental principles, unbound by superstition or ritual. Claims unverified, demonstrations insufficient for theological acceptance. Then I will provide sufficient demonstration," Darkseid stated. He pointed at the Castellan robot. "That machine, it is ancient, yes, a relic from before the Age of Strife. You maintain it through prayer and sacred oils. You do not understand how it functions, only that it does function when properly appeased. Plus, the machine spirit must be honored. This is sacred doctrine. The machine spirit is code. Dims. Darkseid said flatly. Artificial intelligence protocols developed during humanity's golden age degraded over millennia into pseudo-sentience through data corruption. It seems to think because its decision tree algorithms have grown so complex that they mimic consciousness. But it is not alive. It is a program running on hardware you no longer comprehend. Plus, hear tech speech. Cease immediately, or plus. I will prove it, Darkseid interrupted. His eyes glowed. But this time the Omega effect did not film in destructive beams. Instead, the energy extended in precise, hair-thin filaments that danced through the air like living light. They touched the Castellan robot, interfacing directly with its internal systems. The robot convulsed, its optical sensors flared. And then, for the first time in 8,000 years, it spoke with perfect clarity instead of the grinding binary cont it normally used. Systems analysis complete. Power core efficiency at 42% due to accumulated wear on magnetic containment fields. Left leg actuator requires recalibration. Optical targeting array suffering from lens degradation. Behavioral inhibitor protocols experiencing cumulative logic errors due to data corruption across the sectors 7 through 19. Recommend comprehensive maintenance and software restoration. Every tech priest present froze in shock. The Castellan had just diagnosed itself, something thought impossible without dismantling the entire machine and conducting months of sacred ritual examination. Your machine spirit was trying to tell you what was wrong, Darkseid explained, withdrawing the Omega filaments, but you couldn't hear it because you had forgotten the language it speaks. I simply reminded it how to communicate clearly. He turned to face the assembled Mechanicus. This is what I offer. Not prayers that sometimes work, not rituals that may or may not appease temperamental mechanisms, but understanding, actual comprehension of the tools you use to survive. The ranking tech priest, a Magos biologist named Corfex, stepped forward with visible hesitation. Plus, Sif, if you possess such knowledge, why share it? What do you demand in exchange? Plus, access to your archives, Darkseid replied immediately. Every scrap of data you possess regarding warp phenomena, psychic manifestations, mimetic hazards, and consciousness-affecting entities. Every report of demons that spoke strange truths. Every incident where exposed individuals experienced fundamental alterations in their perception of reality. Every fragment of forbidden knowledge locked away as too dangerous to study. Such information is restricted to highest clearance. Even Magos rank insufficient for full access. Then I will elevate you, Darkseid said. In exchange for access, I will provide technological advancement that will make you indispensable to Mars. I will teach you to replicate what I just did with the Castellan, to truly communicate with your machines, to repair without trial and error, to innovate instead of merely preserve. His eyes burned with intensity. I will give you the tools to restore your civilization's lost glory, and all I ask is information that you are not even using. It was a devil's bargain, obviously so. Every tech priest present recognized it as such, but it was also the most tempting offer the Mechanicus had received in 10,000 years. To understand rather than simply worship, to create rather than excavate, to become what they had once been during the dark age of technology, before the fall. Magos Corfex's mechadendrites twitched in patterns, suggesting intense internal debate. Multiple probability matrices ran simultaneously, risk versus reward, heresy versus innovation, doctrine versus discovery. Plus Wui require time to consult with Forge World authorities to determine theological implications. Take all the time you require, Darkseid said magnanimously. I am patient. Unlike your Imperium, I think in geological timescales. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Magos, while you deliberate, consider this. Every hour you delay is an hour your Imperium continues suffering from ignorance. Every day you waste in theological debate is another day your Forge Worlds produce inferior goods through trial and error rather than understanding. I offer certainty. The only question is whether your pride will allow you to accept it. He walked away, leaving the Mechanicus contingent in stunned silence and fierce internal debate. In orbit, Inquisitor Cryus watched it all unfold on vid feeds. He's trying to turn the Mechanicus, she whispered. Emperor's mercy, he's actually trying to corrupt Mars itself. Plus not corruption, sus. Magos Foch's voice responded from her side. The Explorator had been silent throughout the entire engagement, processing, calculating. Subversion. Corruption implies degradation. This is temptation through elevation, more dangerous, significantly more dangerous. Plus, can you resist it? Cryus asked. Can Mars resist? The Magos did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice held unusual uncertainty for a being whose thoughts ran on pure logic. Plaos unknown. The offer violates 917 articles of sacred doctrine. but it also fulfills the primary directive of the quest for knowledge, paradox, unresolvable through standard theological frameworks. That's not an answer, Crius pressed. Plus, it is the only answer logic permits. Foch replied quietly, Plastas woi. Do not know if we can resist, because he offers us the one thing more precious than faith. He offers us understanding, and that may be irresistible. Thus, Crius felt something cold settle in her stomach. Colder than facing demons, colder than staring into the warp itself, because she suddenly understood what Darkseid truly was. He wasn't a warrior who could be defeated in battle. He wasn't a demon who could be banished. He was something far more dangerous. He was a prophet offering a better hell. For 3 days, the galaxy held its breath. Darkseid established a perimeter around the Mechanicus outpost and did nothing overtly aggressive. He simply waited, standing like a monument to inevitability while the Imperium's vast bureaucracy ground through its decision-making process. Reports traveled from Armageddon to Mars, from Mars to Terra, from Terra to the High Lords themselves. Theological debates raged across the Mechanicus Forge worlds. Inquisitorial conclaves convened in emergency session. The Officio Assassinorum calculated success probabilities for 17 different termination scenarios. But while the Imperium deliberated, Darkseid was not idle. He spent the time studying the one thing that had genuinely surprised him since his arrival, the Emperor himself. Every night, when Armageddon's tortured rotation brought a few hours of deeper darkness, Darkseid turned his consciousness toward Terra. His psychic presence was nothing like the warp-based abilities that Imperial psychers wielded. It was structured, mathematical, more akin to a sensor array than actual telepathy. He reached across the void and touched the edges of the Astronomicon, that impossible beacon of psychic light that allowed humanity's ships to navigate the warp. And through the Astronomicon, he felt the Emperor. It was like touching a dying star. The psychic weight was staggering, billions upon billions of souls, all crying out in worship, all bleeding their faith into a corpse that sat upon a throne of suffering. The Emperor was being sacrificed daily. 1,000 psychers burned alive to sustain his barely living form, yet somehow that immense agony was transformed into purpose, into light, into the beacon that held the Imperium together. Remarkable, Darkseid murmured on the third night, his eyes closed in concentration. You are dead and yet deathless, imprisoned and yet omnipresent. The ultimate tyranny, a god who cannot speak, cannot act, cannot even truly live, yet whose will shapes 1,000,000 worlds through the interpreted faith of his worshippers. He opened his eyes, and for the first time since arriving in the 41st millennium, something approaching genuine uncertainty entered his voice. You built better than I anticipated, Emperor of mankind. You created a machine of faith that runs on suffering and transforms it into survival. Grotesque, inefficient, and absolutely terrifyingly functional. He had been attempting to make contact, not to attack, not to subvert, but simply to communicate, to reach the consciousness that surely must exist within that psychic maelstrom. But every attempt met the same result: nothing. The Emperor's presence was vast, but it was also utterly silent, like shouting into the sun and expecting a reply. Either the Emperor could not respond, or he chose not to, and Darkseid could not determine which. You frustrate me, corpse god, Darkseid admitted to the distant stars. Are you truly trapped in silence, or are you simply ignoring me? Do you see me as beneath notice, or are you calculating your response across timescales I cannot perceive? He clenched his fists. I have negotiated with gods before. I have bargained with cosmic entities and elder beings. But you are something new. A god built from desperate faith rather than inherent divinity. And I do not yet understand how to bend you to purpose." His contemplation was interrupted by a change in the local environment. The air pressure dropped, temperature fell, and then, with the sudden violence of a knife through cloth, reality tore open. But this was no warp rift, no demon incursion. This was something else entirely, a wound in space that bled golden light and the scent of alien incense. Through it stepped beings that made even the space marines seem crude. Eldar warriors, their armor flowing like water frozen into ceramic form, their weapons humming with barely contained energy. They were Ulthwé Craftworld Guardians, led by a Farseer whose psychic presence blazed like cold fire. The Eldar Psyker wore robes of midnight blue embroidered with runes that hurt to perceive, and carried a witchblade that sang with the souls of ancient heroes. Her name was Eldorath Starbane, and she had walked the skein of fate for 8 centuries. "Darkseid of Apokolips," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested she was speaking in multiple timelines simultaneously. "I have foreseen 17 futures where you exist in this galaxy. In 11 of them, the Imperium falls within a century. In 4, the Chaos Gods ascend to unprecedented power. In 2, the Tyrannids devour everything while the galaxy tears itself apart in civil war." Her alien eyes, pools of absolute darkness with no visible iris, fixed on him with terrible intensity. "In none of them does life flourish. In all of them, you are the catalyst for extinction." Darkseid regarded her with interest. "A precognitive, how useful. Your species survived the birth of a chaos god by abandoning your entire civilization. You live in floating tombs called craft worlds, clinging to existence through psychic discipline and desperate denial of your own doom." He tilted his head. "And you dare lecture me about extinction?" "We survived because we adapted," Eldorath countered. "Because we learned from our arrogance. Because we understood that some paths lead only to destruction." She gestured with her witchblade, and the air shimmered with visions, probable futures playing out in translucent overlays of possibility. "You seek the anti-life equation. I have seen what happens if you find it. The Imperium becomes a hive mind of absolute obedience. The Chaos Gods, starved of emotion, turn their hunger outward and break through reality's walls. The Tyrannids accelerate their consumption, sensing the galaxy's death throes. The Necrons awaken en masse to harvest a universe of the spiritually dead." "Sounds efficient," Darkseid observed. "Chaos contained, the Imperium unified, order achieved. It is entropy disguised as order." Eldorath's composure cracked slightly, her voice rising. "You see mathematical precision and call it peace. But life requires chaos. Growth requires unpredictability. Evolution requires struggle. Meaning requires choice. Your anti-life equation would not save this galaxy. It would embalm it, preserve it in stasis while the universe itself dies around it." Darkseid considered her words with genuine attention. "You offer an interesting perspective. Your species values individual experience over collective survival. You believe that meaning derives from choice rather than from function." He took a step toward her, and every Eldar Guardian tensed. "But riddle me this, Farseer. You claim to see the future. You perceive probability and possibility across multiple timelines. That means every action is predetermined by the convergence of past choices. Free will becomes illusion once you can calculate its outcomes. So tell me, how is your precognition different from the anti-life equation? Both reduce choice to mathematical certainty." Eldorth's expression flickered, a moment of genuine surprise. "That is not the same thing, isn't it?" Darkseid pressed. You act based on visions of probability. You make choices to bring about preferred futures. But if you can see the outcomes, then the choices are already made. You are simply following the script that fate has written. The only difference between us is that I am honest about it. I seek to prove what you already know, that free will is comfortable mythology, nothing more. No, the Farseer said, but her voice held less certainty. The skein is not fixed. Every action creates branching possibilities. The future is fluid. Until observed, Darkseid interrupted. Until calculated, until predicted. Then it collapses into certainty. His eyes blazed. You, Eldar, crippled your own civilization through hedonism and excess. You created a chaos god through the cumulative weight of your species' depravity. And now you preach to me about the value of choice? Your choices nearly destroyed you. Order would have saved you. Order without meaning is death, Eldorath shot back, her composure returning. We made terrible choices, yes. We fell into darkness through our own flaws, but we also created wonders beyond your comprehension, art that could reshape souls, philosophy that touched the divine, technology that bent reality to imagination's will, all because we were free to explore, to create, to fail. She raised her witch blade. Your order offers no such glory, only function, only submission, only the slow heat death of consciousness itself. Perhaps, Darkseid acknowledged, but glory is irrelevant when measured against survival. Your Imperium understands this. They sacrifice art for ammunition, beauty for brutality, individual worth for collective endurance. They have made the calculation I offer to codify. Meaning is worth less than continued existence. Then why, Eldorath asked quietly, are you trying so hard to convince everyone? If your philosophy is self-evident, if the anti-life equation truly represents mathematical certainty, why do you need to explain it? Why not simply impose it and let the certainty speak for itself? The question hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. Darkseid was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than it had been. Not gentle, but thoughtful. Because, he said slowly, the equation must be accepted, not imposed. Anti-life is not slavery. It is the recognition that slavery was always the condition. Free will is the lie that makes existence bearable. The equation is the truth that makes existence purposeful. It must be understood, not forced. Otherwise, it is merely another form of tyranny, effective but imperfect. Then you doubt, Eldorth said, and now triumph entered her voice. Deep down, you question whether your certainty is as absolute as you claim, because if it were truly certain, truly inevitable, you would not need to convince anyone. You would simply wait for them to realize it themselves. Darkseid's eyes narrowed. Careful, Farseer. Provoking me serves no strategic purpose. I do not provoke. I illuminate. She lowered her witch blade slightly. I came here to kill you, Darkseid, to strike you down before you can corrupt this galaxy further. I have foreseen that in 3 of the 17 timelines, your death here prevents cascading catastrophes. Her eyes met his without fear. But I also foresee that killing you may trigger worse outcomes. The Imperium, learning of your technology, attempts to replicate it and creates something even more terrible. The Chaos Gods, sensing your methods, adapt them to their purposes. Mars fractures into civil war over theological interpretations of your teachings. So you came to threaten but not act, Darkseid summarized. How, Eldar? I came to offer an alternative, Eldorath corrected. Leave this galaxy. Return to your origin dimension. Take your philosophies and your equation quest elsewhere. In exchange, I will show you something that may interest you more than domination. And that is a universe where the anti-life equation already existed, the Farseer said quietly. The Eldar archives contain records from before the fall. Explorations into dead realities where life had achieved your perfect order. Would you like to know what we found? Despite himself, Darkseid was intrigued. Speak. Emptiness, Eldorth said simply. Not death. Death still has meaning, has finality, has the weight of loss. These universes were simply empty. Every species had achieved perfect unity, perfect function, perfect submission to mathematical certainty. And then, with nothing left to strive for, nothing left to choose, nothing left to mean anything, they simply stopped. Stopped growing, stopped changing, eventually stopped moving. They became crystallized in their own perfection, static, eternal, and utterly, absolutely meaningless. She let the image hang between them, a vision of galaxies filled with living beings who had achieved everything Darkseid claimed to seek and had become less than ghosts in the process. Your anti-life equation may be mathematically provable, the Farseer continued, but mathematics describes reality. It does not explain it. 2 + 2 = 4, that is certain. But why should anyone care? What meaning does certainty have without consciousness to appreciate it? What purpose does order have if there's nothing left to order? Darkseid stared at her for a long time. Then he smiled, not pleasantly, but with the expression of someone who has been presented with a genuinely interesting puzzle. You have given me much to consider, Eldar, he admitted. More than your Imperium managed. More than the Chaos Gods attempted. You argue not from fear or faith, but from example, from evidence, from logic. He crossed his arms. I will not leave this galaxy, not yet. But I will investigate your claims. If these dead universes exist in your archives, I wish to see them, to understand what went wrong, to learn whether the equation I seek has a flaw I have not perceived. And if you find that flaw, Eldorath asked, if you discover that your certainty leads only to emptiness, then I will adapt, Darkseid replied. I am many things, Farseer, but I am not foolish. If the anti-life equation represents not salvation but heat death, then I will seek a different equation, one that achieves order without sacrificing meaning, one that proves tyranny and purpose are not mutually exclusive. His eyes glowed. But I will seek it here, in this galaxy, using your Imperium's slow collapse as my laboratory. Because if any civilization in any universe can show me the balance between order and meaning, it will be one that has survived 10,000 years through sheer stubborn refusal to accept extinction. Eldorth regarded him with an expression impossible to read. You are the strangest tyrant I have ever encountered, she said finally. Most would simply kill me for the insult. You debate me. Most tyrants fear being proven wrong, Darkseid replied. I fear only being irrelevant, and irrelevance comes not from defeat, but from pursuing goals that have no meaning. He gestured toward the webway gate the Eldar had arrived through. Go, Farseer. Return to your craft world. Consider our conversation as I consider yours. And perhaps when I have completed my investigation, we will speak again, as equals seeking understanding rather than enemies seeking dominance. The Eldar warriors shifted uncertainly, looking to their Farseer for guidance. Eldorath studied Darkseid for another long moment, then nodded slowly. Perhaps we will, she agreed. Perhaps in one of the timelines I have not yet foreseen, you and I find common ground rather than battlefields. She turned toward the webway gate, then paused. One final question, Darkseid. If you could have absolute power but meaningless existence, or limited power but purposeful existence, which would you choose? Darkseid smiled. I would choose to redefine the question until both were possible simultaneously. That is what separates gods from philosophers, Farseer. Philosophers accept paradoxes. Gods resolve them. The Eldar departed through their gate, leaving Darkseid alone once more with his thoughts. And for the first time since arriving in the 41st millennium, with genuine uncertainty about his path forward. Because the Farseer had touched something he had not expected. Doubt. Not about his strength, not about his eventual triumph, but about whether triumph itself was the correct goal. It was, he decided, the most dangerous conversation he had ever had. The archives of Mars were a cathedral of information, not metaphorically, but literally. The data vaults stretched kilometers underground, their walls lined with cogitator banks that hummed with the prayers of 1 billion machine spirits. Servitors shuffled through endless corridors, their lobotomized minds perfect for the tedious work of data retrieval. And at the center of it all sat the Omniscient Archive, a quantum database containing 17,000 years of accumulated knowledge, forbidden lore, and carefully documented heresies. Darkseid spent 6 days immersed in the archives, his consciousness interfacing directly with the Mechanicus data systems in ways that made even the tech priests nervous. He did not read in any conventional sense. He absorbed, processing information at speeds that would have burned out an unaugmented human brain in seconds. Magos Vosh remained his constant shadow, monitoring every query, every data extraction, ensuring no restricted information was accessed. What Darkseid found both confirmed his theories and complicated them significantly. The Imperium had documented thousands of memetic hazards, ideas that altered those who understood them. Some were clearly chaos corruption, phrases that opened minds to demonic possession, symbols that rewrote neural pathways into devotion to the ruinous powers. But others were different, older, stranger. There were reports from the dark age of technology of concept weapons, information constructs that had been weaponized not through warp sorcery but through pure logic. Mathematical proofs that, once comprehended, caused the viewer to lose all motivation. Philosophical arguments so perfectly constructed that they destroyed the will to resist. Semantic patterns that overwrote personal identity with programmed directives. These were not warp phenomena. They were weapons of pure information, created by humanity at its technological height. And then, during the Age of Strife, they had been systematically destroyed or sealed away because their very existence was too dangerous to tolerate. Your ancestors understood, Darkseid murmured, reading a particularly detailed account of something called the Terminus Theorem, a mathematical proof that had caused 17 research stations to simply stop functioning, their inhabitants alive but utterly devoid of purpose. They knew that consciousness itself could be hacked. That free will was not some mystical absolute, but a vulnerable system that could be exploited through sufficiently precise information architecture. Those weapons were destroyed for good reason, Plast. Vosh responded, his mechadendrites twitching with agitation. They reduced sentient beings to philosophical zombies, living but not alive, thinking but not conscious. The Mechanicus considers them more abominable than chaos itself. Because chaos offers the illusion of choice, Darkseid observed. Even corruption suggests that the victim made a decision, however influenced. But these concept weapons simply deleted choice, made it irrelevant, made it impossible. He looked up from the data screen. This is what I seek, Magos, not the crude corruption of chaos, but the precise surgery of information. The anti-life equation would not be a demon-whispering temptation. It would be a truth so absolute that once comprehended, all other truths become meaningless. Plus, then you seek to become worse than chaos. At least, the ruinous powers leave something recognizable behind. You would leave nothing. I would leave order, Darkseid corrected. Purpose, function, meaning derived from service rather than from the chaos of individual struggle. He returned to his research, dismissing the philosophical debate. But I admit these archives suggest the task is more complex than I anticipated. Creating a concept weapon is apparently easier than surviving its use. Every civilization that developed such tools eventually destroyed itself through their application. He spent another 2 days cross-referencing incident reports, looking for patterns. The data painted a disturbing picture. Every attempt to weaponize information against consciousness had resulted in either the weapon's creators being affected by their own creation, or the weapon mutating in unpredictable ways as it interacted with the warp's reality-warping influence. The Terminus theorem, for example, had been designed to demoralize enemy soldiers. Instead, it had spread beyond its intended targets through a mechanism its creators hadn't anticipated. The warp itself carrying the concept like a virus, infecting everyone who even thought about the theorem in sufficient detail. The containment had required psychic censorship and literal memory wipes across entire planets. The warp is the complication, Darkseid concluded on the 8th day. In my universe, information is discrete, contained. A formula remains a formula, affecting only those who consciously engage with it. But here, where thought bleeds into reality, where the immaterium mirrors material consciousness, here any sufficiently powerful idea becomes quasi-alive. It mutates, it spreads, it evolves beyond its creator's intent. Plus correct assessment, plus Vosh confirmed, plus the warp makes weaponized information unstable. This is why the Imperium destroyed all research into concept weapons. Impossibility of containment. Darkseid drummed his fingers against the data terminal, his mind racing through possibilities. Unless the weapon is anchored not in thought but in physics. Not spread through the warp, but through dimensional framework that supersedes it. His eyes widened fractionally. The Emperor, the Golden Throne, the Astronomicon. He turned to Foch with sudden intensity. Tell me about the Golden Throne's original purpose, before the Emperor was entombed upon it. What was it designed to do? Foch's mechadendrites froze in a pattern suggesting deep reluctance. That information is restricted beyond Mago's clearance, requires inquisitorial authorization and basts. Then get that authorization, Darkseid interrupted, or I will extract the information through other means. I have been patient, Magos. I have honored our agreement, but my patience has limits, and you are approaching them. The threat hung in the air like ozone before lightning. Foch's consciousness ran probability calculations, risk assessments, theological implications. Finally, he transmitted a heavily encrypted request to higher authorities. The response came back within minutes. Surprisingly, authorization was granted. Plus, Fabricator General has approved disclosure, Foch said, his voice carrying notes of surprise and apprehension. Plus, the Golden Throne was designed by the Emperor during the Great Crusade. Primary function, psychic amplification and dimensional navigation. Secondary function, gateway stabilization for Webway project. Tertiary function, reality anchor to prevent warp incursion. Plus, a psychic amplifier, Darkseid repeated slowly, capable of projecting consciousness across the entire galaxy, sustained by the sacrifice of thousands of psykers daily, and connected to the Emperor, a being of such overwhelming psychic magnitude that his mere existence creates the Astronomicon. His expression shifted to something approaching revelation. That's not a throne, that's a transmission array, a galaxy-spanning broadcast system, currently using its bandwidth to maintain a navigation beacon, man. Heretical interpretation, but technically accurate. Sloss, Foch admitted reluctantly. And if one could access that broadcast system, Darkseid continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, if one could transmit something other than navigational data through the Astronomicon's carrier wave, something like a mimetic weapon, a concept construct, an information payload designed to rewrite consciousness itself. Plus Des Voch's voice crackled with sudden horror. You cannot. You must not. The Astronomicon reaches every imperial world, every ship, every astropath, billions upon billions of minds touched by its light daily. If you were to corrupt it, not corrupt, Darkseid corrected, his eyes blazing with terrible understanding. Perfect. The anti-life equation transmitted through the Emperor's own psychic infrastructure delivered directly into the consciousness of every Imperial citizen simultaneously, not as an invasion, not as chaos corruption, but as truth, arriving with the authority of the God Emperor himself. He stood abruptly, data screens forgotten. That is the answer. That is how you make a concept weapon function in a warp-saturated universe. You don't fight the warp. You use the Imperium's own defenses against it. The Golden Throne, the Astronomicon, the Emperor's psychic might. They're already broadcasting faith and devotion across the galaxy. All I need to do is adjust the signal, add a new truth to the transmission, prove to humanity that their suffering has always been in service of inevitable order, and their resistance to that order is the only source of pain. Foch's mechadendrites thrashed in patterns of extreme agitation, plus this is beyond heresy. This is cosmic treason. You propose to hijack the Emperor's own voice, to speak through his light, to turn the Imperium's greatest asset into a weapon against itself. I propose to complete what the Emperor began, Darkseid countered. He unified humanity through force and will. He created an empire built on absolute obedience. He demanded worship while claiming to reject godhood. He was a hypocrite, Magos, and a magnificent one. But his work remains incomplete. The Imperium suffers because its citizens still believe their choices matter, that their resistance has meaning, that their individual will can change outcomes. The anti-life equation would not destroy that belief. It would simply reveal that it was always false. And in that revelation, suffering would end, struggle would cease. Humanity would finally achieve the unity the Emperor always intended. Place, or humanity would become a galaxy of living corpses, philosophers, zombies, conscious but not alive. Salah. Is there a difference? Darkseid asked quietly. Your servitors are conscious but not alive. Your space marines surrender individual identity to their chapters. Your priests sacrifice autonomy to Mars. Your soldiers die by the billions for an emperor who cannot acknowledge their sacrifice. The Imperium already reduces individuals to functions. I merely propose to make that reduction complete, honest, absolute. The Magos had no response, because Darkseid was right, terrifyingly, undeniably right. The Imperium did operate on principles that were uncomfortably close to what Darkseid described. The only difference was scale and honesty. Plus, thus, what you propose is impossible, regardless. Plus, Foch finally managed. Plus, the Golden Throne is on Terra, defended by Custodes, Sisters of Silence, entire armies. The Emperor himself guards it, even in his diminished state. You cannot simply walk into the throne room and reprogram humanity's most sacred artifact. Saus. No, Darkseid agreed, beginning to walk toward the archive exit. I cannot. Not as I am now. Not in this weakened avatar state. Not without full access to Apokolips technology. Not while still learning this universe's rules. He paused at the doorway. But what if I didn't need to physically access the throne? What if the equation could be transmitted remotely? Piggybacked onto the Astronomican's existing signal through a carefully crafted psychic intrusion. What if all I needed was a sufficiently powerful broadcast point and the correct informational payload? Oh, even that would require psychic power beyond anything except the Emperor himself, or the Chaos Gods, or plus. Foch stopped, his processor suddenly connecting implications he desperately wished he hadn't seen. Or an alliance, Darkseid finished for him, between myself and a faction already possessing galaxy-spanning psychic infrastructure. A faction with the technical knowledge to implement what I design. A faction that values order and function above individual liberty. He turned to look at Foch directly. Tell me, Magos, does Mars have any psychic relay stations that interface with the Astronomican? Any systems designed to receive and interpret its signal for navigational purposes? Plus, we possess astropathic choirs, psychic interpretation systems, cogitator arrays designed to decode Astronomican wavelengths for fleet coordination. But they are receivers only, not transmitters. They cannot broadcast back through the Emperor's light. Not yet, Darkseid said with a smile that contained no warmth whatsoever. But I have shown you how to repair ancient technology, how to create loyal artificial intelligence, how to interface with systems you thought forever beyond your understanding. And now I'm offering to show you one more miracle, how to turn receivers into transmitters, how to give Mars a voice in the Astronomican itself, how to make the Mechanicus not merely servants of the Imperium, but its neural architecture. He took a step closer and Foch's servos locked in place, unable to retreat even though every survival subroutine screamed at him to flee. All I ask in exchange, Darkseid continued, his voice soft as falling ash, is that when you build this capability, you allow me to use it once. One transmission, one broadcast, one moment where the anti-life equation flows through the Emperor's own light and touches every mind in the Imperium simultaneously. His eyes blazed crimson. Give me this, and I will give Mars the power to speak with the Emperor's own voice. Refuse, and I will find another path to my goal, one that may not leave the Mechanicus intact. It was the ultimate devil's bargain. Power beyond imagining, in exchange for facilitating cosmic tyranny. The ability to influence the Imperium at the highest level, traded for complicity in ending human free will forever. Foch's consciousness fragmented across 17 simultaneous processing threads, each reaching different conclusions, none of them acceptable. Thread 1. Accept gain unprecedented power. Risk total civilizational dissolution. Thread 2. Refuse. Maintain moral integrity. Likely result in personal termination and Mars's marginalization. Thread 3. Report to authorities. Trigger immediate military response. Possibly prevent catastrophe or accelerate it. Thread 4. Delay. Request additional authorization. Buy time for better options to emerge. Thread 5. 17. Cognitive overload. Paradox detected. Unable to resolve. Plus, I cannot make this decision alone. Plus. Foch finally managed. This must be brought before the Fabricator General, before the High Lords of Terra, before before you run out of time, Darkseid interrupted, because while you deliberate, while you pray and calculate and seek authorization, I am learning, adapting, growing stronger in this universe by the day. Eventually, I will not need Mars's cooperation. I will simply take what I require through force, but I would prefer partnership. I would prefer that Mars makes this choice willingly, with full understanding of what it means. He turned back toward the archive depths. You have 3 days to bring me the Fabricator General's response. After that, I begin working on alternative methods. And I assure you, Magos, you will not like my alternatives. He disappeared into the Data Cathedral's shadows, leaving Foch alone with the most dangerous knowledge imaginable, the exact methodology by which Darkseid intended to end free will across the entire Imperium. The Magos stood frozen for 17 minutes and 43 seconds, his processors locked in recursive deliberation. Then, finally, he transmitted an emergency priority message to Mars, marked with clearance codes reserved for extinction-level threats. Plus, urgent. Darkseid has achieved conceptual breakthrough. Anti-life equation. Deployment method identified. Golden Throne itself is target. Request immediate Fabricator. General intervention. Request inquisitorial oversight. Request guidance. Because I do not know if stopping him is mercy or doom. Plus, the message traveled through the warp, carried on streams of corrupted data and desperate prayer. And on Mars. In the deepest vaults where the Fabricator General resided in his throne of bronze and blessed steel, ancient eyes read the message and understood what it meant. The invasion was no longer theoretical. Darkseid had found his weapon, and he was preparing to fire it at the heart of humanity itself. The question now was whether the Imperium would stop him, or whether, in their desperation and pragmatism, they would help him pull the trigger. The response from Mars came not in 3 days, but in 3 hours. And it came not through Vox transmission or data pulse, but in person. The sky above Armageddon tore open, not with the chaotic rupture of a warp rift, but with the precise geometry of a webway gate. From it emerged a delegation that made even Darkseid pause in genuine surprise. The Fabricator General of Mars himself, accompanied by an Inquisitor Lord of the Ordo Malleus, a Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, and, most unexpectedly, a silent sister whose very presence created a psychic dead zone that made reality feel uncomfortably solid. The Fabricator General was a monument to augmentation taken to its ultimate conclusion. More machine than the machines he commanded, his body was a cathedral of blessed steel and ancient technology. He moved on 6 legs that terminated in mag-locked claws. His torso bristled with mechadendrites, each carrying instruments of creation or destruction. His head was no longer remotely human, a crystalline matrix housed within articulated metal, glowing with the light of consciousness translated into pure information. When he spoke, reality itself seemed to listen. Ploos Darkseid of Apokolips, your proposal has been analyzed by every senior Magos on Mars, by the Fabricator General's inner circle, by computational engines older than the Imperium itself. Our conclusion is unprecedented. Darkseid faced the delegation without fear, though he recognized the custodian as perhaps the most dangerous individual he had yet encountered in this universe. Genetically engineered to beyond even Space Marine standards, trained by the Emperor himself, bearing weapons that radiated an aura of absolute lethality. The Golden Warrior's guardian spear was not pointed at him, but the threat was implicit. Unprecedented is not the same as negative, Darkseid observed. "Speak plainly, Fabricator General. Have you come to accept my offer, or to attempt my termination?" "Neither. Police," the Fabricator General replied. "Bansas, we have come to present an alternative." Boss, this was unexpected. Darkseid's eyes narrowed. "I am listening." The Inquisitor Lord stepped forward, a woman named Covenant, whose augmetic eye glowed with power that suggested she had stared into the warp and survived with her sanity mostly intact. When she spoke, her voice carried centuries of authority. "We have consulted the most ancient records. We have spoken with those who remember the Emperor's own words from before his entombment, and we have reached a conclusion that will either save the Imperium or doom it irreversibly." She paused, weighing her next words with visible care. "The Emperor foresaw you." Silence. Even Darkseid was genuinely surprised. "Explain," Covenant continued. "During the Great Crusade, the Emperor spoke to his custodians of external variables, beings from beyond the galaxy, beyond the warp, who would arrive in humanity's darkest hour. He was unclear whether these variables would be salvation or extinction, but he left instructions, sealed within the Golden Throne's deepest archives, accessible only in circumstances matching your arrival's parameters." She produced a data slate, its casing marked with seals that predated the Horus heresy. These instructions were to be activated if three conditions were met. First, the arrival of an entity demonstrating technology beyond Imperium or Chaos capabilities. Second, said entity's expressed goal of imposing order through informational rather than military means. Third, said entity's recognition that the Golden Throne could be weaponized for mimetic transmission. "I have met all three conditions," Darkseid stated. "What do the Emperor's instructions say?" Covenant activated the data slate. A hololithic projection appeared, and Darkseid found himself staring at a recorded message from the Emperor himself, preserved across 10,000 years. The figure in the projection was magnificent, 11 feet tall, golden-skinned, radiating power that made even this recorded echo feel overwhelming. When he spoke, his voice was measured, calm, and infinitely sad. "If you are seeing this message, then something from beyond our reality has arrived, seeking to use humanity's faith as a weapon against itself. To whoever you are, whatever you are, I say this: I understand your logic. I comprehend your philosophy. I too recognize that humanity's greatest weakness is its belief in individual primacy over collective survival. I too sought to impose order through certainty rather than through faith." The Emperor's image paused, as if gathering thoughts across temporal boundaries. "But I learned through 10,000 years of crusade and conquest that absolute order is not sustainable in a universe where thought bleeds into reality. The warp exists because consciousness exists. The Chaos Gods exist because emotion exists. Your anti-life equation, and yes, I foresaw that specific terminology, would not eliminate the warp. It would freeze it, crystallize it, turn the immaterium into a static hell where demons become eternal rather than mutable, where Chaos Gods lose their creativity and become infinitely more destructive in their stagnation." Darkseid's expression was unreadable as he listened. "I offer you an alternative," the Emperor continued. "Not surrender of your goals, but refinement of them. The Golden Throne was never meant only as a life support system. It was designed as a regulatory mechanism, a way to impose structure on the warp itself without destroying the dynamism that allows consciousness to exist. If you truly possess the knowledge you claim, then help me complete this work. Not by broadcasting anti-life, but by encoding it into the Astronomicon as a carrier wave, a subharmonic that imposes order without eliminating agency. Make humanity more resilient to chaos through structured thought, not mindless obedience. The projection flickered. This is my offer, external variable. Work with the Imperium, not against it. Become not its destroyer, but its architect. Help me save humanity from itself, not by ending its consciousness, but by disciplining it. In exchange, I will grant you something you desire more than domination. I will grant you purpose in a universe that actually challenges your capabilities. The projection faded, leaving only silence. Darkseid stood motionless for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an emotion he had not displayed since arriving in the 41st millennium. Genuine uncertainty. The Emperor offers me partnership? He asks me to moderate my goals in exchange for collaborative development of a partially realized anti-life framework. He looked at each member of the delegation. This is not what I expected. The Emperor rarely provides what is expected, the custodian said, speaking for the first time. His voice was a rumbling bass that carried absolute conviction. He does not ask you to abandon your philosophy. He asks you to recognize that this universe requires nuance, that absolute certainty in a realm of chaos creates not order, but catastrophic stasis. Plus, from Mechanicus' perspective, plus the Fabricator General added, your proposed transmutation of Astronomicon would likely succeed, but long-term modeling suggests 93% probability of catastrophic warp collapse within 2 centuries. Humanity would achieve unity, then humanity would ossify, then humanity would die. The Emperor offers you a greater challenge, Inquisitor Covenant said. Not can you impose order, but can you impose order that sustains rather than destroys? Any tyrant can crush free will. Can you discipline it instead? Can you create a framework that makes humanity stronger without making it extinct? Darkseid's mind raced through implications, calculations, possibilities he had not fully considered. The Emperor's words resonated with uncomfortable accuracy. The dead universes the Eldar Farseer had described matched perfectly with what total anti-life implementation would create. And if this universe's unique properties meant that such stasis would also freeze the warp into eternal horror. You offer me a puzzle, Darkseid said slowly. Not conquest, but engineering. Not domination, but collaboration on a project even I have not fully conceptualized. His eyes glowed thoughtfully. The Emperor was clever. He did not appeal to my morality. He knew I have none in conventional terms. He appealed to my pride, to my desire for challenges worthy of my capabilities. Will you accept? Covenant asked. Darkseid was silent for nearly a full minute. Around him, the Armageddon winds howled across devastated wastes. Above, the blood-red sky churned with atmospheric poisons. This universe was dying by inches, grinding itself down through entropy and war. But it was also alive, vibrantly, furiously alive in ways his orderly home dimension could never match. I will accept, he finally said, but with conditions. First, I retain my research into anti-life theory. I continue developing the conceptual framework, even if application is delayed or modified. Second, I receive full access to Golden Throne architecture and Astronomicon broadcast principles. If I am to help refine humanity's psychic infrastructure, I must understand it completely. Third, the Mechanicus implements my technological teachings across at least 3 Forge worlds. I will not work in isolation. My knowledge must propagate, or partnership is meaningless. Conditions acceptable with modifications, plus the Fabricator General responded. Anti-life research permitted under Mechanicus oversight. Golden Throne. Access granted but supervised by Custodian Guard at all times. Technological dissemination limited to 1 Forge world. initially, expanding based on demonstrated safety. Please. And there will be restrictions, Inquisitor Covenant added firmly. You will operate within Imperium law. You will not harm Imperial citizens except in legitimate self-defense. You will submit to regular psychic examination to ensure you have not been corrupted by chaos. And if at any point you betray this agreement, if you attempt to implement anti-life unilaterally, every force the Imperium commands will converge on your position simultaneously. Understood, Darkseid replied. I am to be a consultant, not a conqueror, an architect, not an invader. He smiled slightly. It is an unusual position for me, but not unwelcome. Very well. I accept the Emperor's offer. I will help refine humanity's psychic infrastructure. I will discipline the Imperium's consciousness without destroying it. I will prove that order and agency are not mutually exclusive, or I will prove the Emperor's faith in that possibility was misplaced. The custodian stepped forward, bringing his guardian spear to a formal rest position. Then, in the Emperor's name, I recognize you as external consultant to the Golden Throne Project. You will be assigned quarters on Mars. You will work under Mechanicus supervision, and you will be watched. Darkseid of Apokolips, watched every moment of every day by eyes that have guarded the Emperor for 10,000 years. I would expect nothing less, Darkseid replied. The Silent Sister, who had remained motionless throughout the entire exchange, finally moved. She stepped forward and placed one hand on Darkseid's arm, and he felt her null field wash over him, testing, measuring. His Omega effect flickered but did not fail. His dimensional anchor held against her pariah aura. After several seconds, she withdrew her hand and signed in the custodian's direction. She confirms you are not warp-tainted, the Golden Warrior translated. Not demon, not possessed, not corrupted, simply other. That will be sufficient. The delegation began preparing to depart, but before they could activate their webway gate, Darkseid spoke one final time. Tell me, the Emperor's message. How long had it been waiting for me? How long ago did he foresee this exact scenario? Inquisitor Covenant checked the data slate's metadata. Her expression shifted to something between awe and horror. The encryption dates to M29, 29,000 years ago, before the Great Crusade even began. She looked up at Darkseid with new understanding. He saw you coming before the Imperium even existed. He has been preparing for this moment for the entire span of human history since the Age of Strife. Darkseid's eyes blazed with something that might have been respect. Then the Emperor truly was a god in all but name, to see across 30 millennia, to predict variables from outside reality itself, to prepare contingencies for impossibilities. He nodded slowly. I chose the right universe to invade, not because it was weak, but because it was the first to present genuine challenge, the first to offer me a puzzle worthy of solution. Just remember, the custodian said coldly, the Emperor also prepared for the scenario where you refuse his offer, where you betray his trust, where you prove irredeemable. He touched the shaft of his guardian spear meaningfully. Those contingencies are also in place, and they involve weapons you have not yet encountered. Weapons the Emperor kept secret, even from his own sons. I would hope for nothing less, Darkseid replied with dark amusement. A god who did not prepare for every possibility would be unworthy of the title. The webway gate activated, and the delegation began departing. Magos Vosh remained behind, his mechadendrites twitching with barely contained agitation. Plus you actually agreed. You abandoned your absolute position. You compromised. The Magos's voice carried genuine confusion. Plus, why? You demonstrated capability to threaten entire Imperium. You could have refused, could have fought, could have pursued anti-life regardless. Darkseid turned to regard the tech priest with something approaching fondness, if such an emotion was possible for him. Because Magos Vosh, I realized something during my time in your archives, something the Eldar Farseer suggested and the Emperor's message confirmed. The anti-life equation is not a destination, it is a tool, and tools are only valuable when applied to problems worthy of their sophistication. He gestured toward the stars, toward the galaxy beyond. In my home universe, I had nearly achieved total dominion. A few more centuries, and I would have proven anti-life absolute. And then what? Endless stasis? Eternal order with no challenges, no variables, no purpose beyond maintenance? He smiled, genuinely smiled, for the first time since his arrival. This universe offers me something far more valuable than victory. It offers me eternal struggle, a puzzle that cannot be solved through simple force. A game where even gods must negotiate. The Emperor understood this when he created the Imperium, that survival requires constant adaptation, that order must coexist with chaos to remain dynamic. Darkseid's eyes blazed with newfound purpose. I came here to conquer. Instead, I have found something better. I have found meaning beyond mere dominion. And that, Magos Vosh, is worth more than any equation. The tech priest processed this statement for several seconds. Finally, Plus, you have become philosopher, not conqueror. Unexpected outcome. Plus, all conquerors become philosophers eventually, Darkseid replied. The question is whether they do so before or after destroying everything they sought to rule. I choose before. He began walking toward the Mechanicus facility. Come, Magos, we have work to do, an Imperium to refine, a golden throne to study, a psychic infrastructure to discipline without destroying. The Emperor has given me a gift. He has given me a puzzle that may take millennia to solve. And if you fail, if compromise proves impossible, if anti-life remains incompatible with sustained consciousness, then I will have learned something valuable, Darkseid said simply. And in 10,000 years, perhaps another external variable will arrive and succeed where I did not. But I do not believe I will fail, because the 41st millennium has taught me something my home universe never could. Plus, which is... Darkseid paused at the facility entrance, silhouetted against Armageddon's dying light. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of genuine revelation. That tyranny without purpose is merely entropy in different clothing. That order must serve life, not replace it. And that the greatest dominion is not over others, but over the chaos within oneself. He looked back at Vosh, his eyes burning with terrible clarity. The Emperor sits on his throne, dead and yet deathless, suffering beyond comprehension, and through that suffering he holds an empire together across 10,000 years. That is power beyond mere force. That is will beyond simple certainty. That is the kind of dominion worthy of pursuit. He entered the facility, leaving Vosh alone with thoughts that would occupy his processors for years to come. Above Armageddon, the stars burned with cold light. Across the galaxy, the Astronomicon pulsed with the Emperor's dying dream. In the warp, Chaos gods stirred with uncertainty, sensing that something fundamental had shifted, that an invasion had become a collaboration, that a threat had become an asset, that the 41st millennium had absorbed another impossibility and emerged somehow stronger for it. And in the depths of the Mechanicus facility, Darkseid of Apokolips, conqueror of galaxies, seeker of ultimate dominion, tyrant of Apokolips, bent his consciousness to a new task, not ending free will but disciplining it, not destroying consciousness but structuring it, not imposing anti-life, but creating something unprecedented, a synthesis between order and agency that might, just might, save humanity from itself. The invasion had ended, the partnership had begun, and the 41st millennium would never be the same. In the months and years that followed, the Imperium learned to live with its strange new ally, though ally was perhaps too generous a term, and prisoner with privileges too harsh. Darkseid existed in a space between integration and isolation, working within Mechanicus facilities under constant custodian supervision, his every action monitored, his every breakthrough scrutinized for potential corruption or betrayal. He proved invaluable and infuriating in equal measure. The Forge world of Styges the White became his primary laboratory, chosen for its history of unorthodox research and willingness to push doctrinal boundaries. There, under Fabricator General oversight and inquisitorial observation, Darkseid began the patient work of teaching humanity to truly understand its own technology, not through prayer and ritual, but through comprehension, not through faith in machine spirits, but through recognition of the engineering principles that made machines function. The results were simultaneously miraculous and disturbing. Production efficiency on Styges 8 increased by 43% within the first year. Equipment failures dropped to nearly zero. Ancient relics thought irreparable were restored to full function. The Forge world began producing weapons and equipment of a quality not seen since the Dark Age of technology, not through rediscovering STCs, but through actually understanding the principles those templates had encoded. But there was a cost. The tech priests of Styges 38 began to change. They prayed less. They questioned more. They started viewing their augmetics not as holy union with the machine god, but as practical tools for enhanced capability. The religious fervor that had sustained the Mechanicus for 10 millennia began to erode, replaced by something colder, more rational, more certain. Some called it enlightenment. Others called it the first stage of corruption. Inquisitor Covenant watched it all with growing concern, filing reports that traveled to Terra and generated fierce debate among the High Lords. Was Darkseid keeping his bargain, or was he simply implementing anti-life more slowly, more subtly, through cultural transformation rather than psychic transmission? The question remained unresolved, divisive, and potentially unanswerable until the transformation completed, at which point reversal might be impossible. On Terra itself, within the most sacred chambers of the Imperial Palace, Darkseid was granted limited access to the Golden Throne's outer systems, never alone, never unsupervised, but access nonetheless. He studied the Emperor's masterwork with the focus of a craftsman examining a rival's technique, his consciousness interfacing with technology that had been designed by the greatest mind humanity had ever produced. What he found humbled him in ways he would never admit aloud. The Golden Throne was not simply a psychic amplifier or a life support system. It was a regulatory mechanism for reality itself, a machine that imposed structure on the warp through the sheer force of the Emperor's will, transmitted across the galaxy through the Astronomicon. Every psyker who looked upon the Emperor's light felt not just guidance, but a subtle pressure toward order, toward loyalty, toward subsuming individual will to collective purpose. The Emperor had been implementing a form of anti-life for 10,000 years, not as totalizing as Darkseid's theoretical equation, not as absolute in its certainty, but a discipline nonetheless. A gentle, persistent pressure that made humanity more resistant to chaos, more unified in purpose, more willing to sacrifice individual freedom for collective survival. "You were already doing what I sought to do," Darkseid murmured during one of his supervised sessions with the throne's interface systems. "Just more slowly, more subtly. with enough plausible deniability that your subjects could believe they still possessed free will. He touched the ancient machinery with something approaching reverence. You were a better tyrant than I ever was, because your subjects loved their chains and called them faith. The custodian guard observing him, a warrior named Valdor who had served since before the Horus heresy, spoke quietly. The Emperor did not enslave, he guided. There is a difference. Is there? Darkseid asked without turning. Your subjects believe they make choices, but those choices always align with the Emperor's will. Is that agency, or simply the illusion of agency? Is there a meaningful distinction? Valdor had no answer. Or perhaps he simply refused to voice it. The greatest challenge came when Darkseid finally interfaced with the Emperor's consciousness directly, not through psychic contact, which remained impossible, but through the throne's data architecture. The Emperor had encoded fragments of his awareness into the machine itself, subroutines that continued his work, even while his conscious mind remained locked in eternal psychic warfare with chaos. What Darkseid found in those subroutines shocked him. Doubt. The Emperor had doubted, had questioned whether his approach was correct, whether his tyranny was justified, whether the price of human survival was worth paying. The subroutines contained contingencies for scenarios where the Imperium became irredeemable, where humanity's suffering exceeded any possible benefit from continued existence, where the merciful choice would be to let the species die rather than persist in eternal agony. The Emperor had prepared to destroy his own Imperium if it became more prison than protection. You were not certain, Darkseid whispered to the silent machinery. You pursued order not from absolute conviction, but from desperate hope. You built tyranny not because you believed in it, but because you saw no alternative that did not end in extinction. His eyes dimmed slightly. You and I are not the same after all. I am stone. You were always human, even when pretending to be a god. It was the closest Darkseid had ever come to respecting something he could not dominate. Across the galaxy, reactions to Darkseid's presence varied wildly. Some Forge worlds petitioned to host him, desperate for the technological advancement he represented. Others declared him anathema, heretic, a corruption that must be purged before he destroyed the Mechanicus' soul. Space Marine chapters split on the question. Some saw him as a tool the Emperor had prepared for humanity's use, others as a test of faith that must be resisted. The Chaos Gods watched with interest and growing concern. Darkseid's presence created ripples in the warp they could not fully control. His higher dimensional physics introduced variables into their domain that followed rules outside their influence. Tzeentch saw opportunity. Khorne saw insult. Nurgle saw inevitability. Slaanesh saw possibility. And the Eldar, observing from their dying craft worlds, recognized what the Imperium had not yet fully grasped. That Darkseid's agreement to work within Imperial structure did not represent surrender, but infiltration. Not corruption through destruction, but transformation through collaboration. He was changing the Imperium from within, making it more efficient, more rational, more ordered, and in doing so, making it more like Apokolips with every passing year. Whether this was salvation or damnation remained unclear. Perhaps it was both simultaneously, the ultimate paradox of the 41st millennium, where survival required compromise with the very tyranny one claimed to oppose. Farseer Eldorath, watching the skein of probability shift and reform around Darkseid's influence, saw 17 futures collapse into 3. In the first, Darkseid succeeds in disciplining humanity's consciousness without destroying it. The Imperium becomes more resilient, more unified, more capable, but also more inhuman. Humanity survives, but what survives might no longer be recognizably human. In the second, Darkseid's influence corrupts too deeply, too quickly. The Imperium fractures in civil war between those who embrace his teachings and those who reject them. In the chaos itself surges through the cracks, and the galaxy burns. In the third, Darkseid completes his work and departs, leaving behind an Imperium transformed, whether for better or worse, even the Farseer could not determine. But the legacy remains, written into humanity's psychic architecture, irreversible and eternal. He came as an invader, Eldorath told her Craftworld's council. He became a consultant. He will leave as a god, not through worship, but through having reshaped consciousness itself in his image. The Emperor prepared for external threats. He did not prepare for external evolution. We must watch. We must wait. And we must be ready to act if the transformation proves catastrophic. But for now, on Mars and Terra and Stygies of the the work continued. Darkseid of Apokolips, Lord of Tyranny, Seeker of Anti-Life, bent his consciousness to the most difficult puzzle he had ever encountered: how to impose order without destroying meaning, how to discipline will without eliminating agency, how to prove that tyranny and purpose were not mutually exclusive. Whether he would succeed remained unknown. But the 41st millennium had absorbed him, integrated him, made him part of its endless struggle. He had come to conquer and stayed to collaborate. He had arrived seeking to end free will and found himself defending a modified version of it. In the end, perhaps, the Imperium had done to him what it did to all threats: absorbed the useful parts, isolated the dangerous parts, and continued grinding forward through sheer momentum and desperate faith. Or perhaps Darkseid had done to the Imperium what he always intended: begun the slow, patient work of rewriting its foundations, knowing that true dominion is measured not in years, but in millennia. Not in conquered territory, but in transformed consciousness. Only time would tell. And in the 41st millennium, time was the one resource more abundant than suffering, and nearly as indifferent to individual fates. The invasion had ended. The infiltration had begun. And somewhere in the space between tyranny and liberty, between certainty and chaos, between anti-life and meaning, a new form of order was being born. The Emperor protects, but now he had help. Whether that help would save humanity or doom it remained the greatest unanswered question in a galaxy that specialized in impossible choices. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But now there was also something else, something new, something that might be called hope or might be called horror, depending on whether you valued survival over sovereignty. Darkseid called it progress. The Imperium called it collaboration. History would call it inevitable. And in 10,000 more years, when the judgment finally came, perhaps someone would look back and understand whether the Stone King who fell from beyond the stars had been humanity's salvation or its final damnation. Until then, the work continued. The galaxy turned. And in the depths of Mars, a tyrant from another universe learned what the Emperor had always known, that the greatest tyranny is the one people accept willingly, believing it to be freedom.